Welcome to this tranquil space. Here, the day's demands fade to nothing. This evening, we're going to explore a remarkable journey through medical history, one that changed human suffering forever. We'll discover how curious minds experimented with mysterious gases and stumbled upon the gift of painless surgery, turning what was once an ordeal into an act of compassionate healing. Accompanied by soothing music and abstract imagery, we'll be uncovering little-known wonders and fascinating stories that gently feed your curiosity as you drift towards sleep. If you enjoy these calm adventures with us, don't be shy. Like, subscribe, and leave a comment to help other smart sleepers dream too. And now, take a deep breath, let your body sink into comfort, and allow your mind to rest and your eyes to close as the tale unfolds before you. The air of the 18th century carried mysteries that no one could yet explain. Throughout Europe, in laboratories lit by candlelight and warmed by coal fires, natural philosophers bent over their workbenches with glass vessels and curious apparatus, trying to understand the invisible world around them. These were men driven by questions that seem almost quaint to us now. What is air made of? Can it be separated into different substances? What happens when we breathe, and what exactly enters our lungs? In the 1770s, a Unitarian minister in England named Joseph Priestley was conducting experiments that would reshape humanity's understanding of the atmosphere itself. Priestley was a remarkable figure, a man whose interests ranged from theology to politics to natural philosophy. He had a gentle disposition and an insatiable curiosity about the workings of nature. In his modest laboratory, he heated various substances and collected the gases they released, trapping them in glass containers over mercury or water. It was patient, methodical work, requiring careful observation and steady hands. On an August day in 1774, Priestley focused the sun's rays through a powerful lens onto a sample of mercuric oxide, a reddish powder. As the substance heated, it released a gas that Priestley carefully collected. When he tested this gas, he made a startling discovery. A candle burned more brightly in it than in ordinary air. A mouse placed in a sealed container of this gas remained lively far longer than one in regular air. Most remarkably, when Priestley himself breathed the gas, he felt peculiarly light and comfortable, describing the sensation as making his chest feel peculiarly light and easy. Priestley had isolated what he called dephlogisticated air, though we know it today by the name that would come later, oxygen. He had, quite literally, bottled one of the essential elements of life itself. The discovery rippled through the scientific community of Europe, carried by letters and journal articles, discussed in the coffee houses of London and the salons of Paris. Across the English Channel, a brilliant French chemist named Antoine Lavoisier was building upon these discoveries with his own meticulous experiments. Lavoisier brought a new level of precision to chemistry, carefully weighing substances before and after reactions, measuring everything with an almost obsessive attention to detail. His laboratory in Paris was filled with custom-made instruments crafted by the finest artisans, scales so sensitive they could detect the weight of a breath. Lavoisier recognized that Priestley's dephlogisticated air was actually an element, one of the fundamental building blocks of matter. He gave it the name oxygen, from Greek words meaning acid former, because he believed, not entirely correctly, that all acids contained this element. More importantly, Lavoisier demonstrated that breathing was a form of combustion, a slow burning that took place in the lungs and released the warmth that kept living creatures alive. Air, he showed, was not a simple substance but a mixture of gases, primarily oxygen and another gas he called azote, which we now know as nitrogen. These discoveries opened floodgates of chemical exploration. Natural philosophers throughout Europe began isolating and studying other gases with increasing sophistication. Each new gas had its own properties, its own character, its own effects on living things. There was fixed air, what we call carbon dioxide, discovered by Joseph Black in Scotland. There was hydrogen, the lightest of all gases, which could make soap bubbles rise toward the ceiling and would later lift balloons into the sky. In this atmosphere of chemical curiosity, Priestley continued his investigations. Among his many discoveries was a gas he produced by applying heat to iron filings moistened with nitric acid. This gas had peculiar properties. It was colorless when first produced but turned orange-brown when exposed to air. Priestley noted its effects with characteristic precision, though he did not immediately recognize all of its significance. He called it dephlogisticated nitrous air. Today we know this gas as nitrous oxide. The isolation of nitrous oxide in 1772 was, at first, simply another entry in the growing catalogue of aerial substances. It seemed no more or less important than the dozens of other gases being discovered and characterized during this remarkable period. Priestley noted its properties in his scientific papers, but he could not have imagined what role this particular gas would eventually play in transforming human experience. The late 18th century was a time when chemistry was emerging from the shadow of alchemy, when systematic investigation was replacing mystical speculation. The careful work of men like Priestley and Lavoisier established that the world operated according to understandable principles, that substances could be isolated and studied, that effects could be predicted and reproduced. They created a foundation of knowledge and, perhaps more importantly, a methodology of careful experimentation that would serve future generations. These natural philosophers worked in an age before specialized scientific disciplines, before universities had departments of chemistry or physics. They were often clergymen or physicians or wealthy gentlemen who pursued knowledge for its own sake, driven by wonder rather than commercial application. Their laboratories were extensions of their homes, their equipment often made by their own hands or commissioned from local craftsmen. They shared their findings through letters and meetings of scientific societies, building a community of knowledge that spanned national boundaries. As the century drew toward its close, the catalogue of known gases grew longer. Each had been isolated, tested, and characterized. Careful records filled laboratory notebooks, documenting properties and reactions. Yet these substances remained, for the most part, curiosities of the laboratory, scientific achievements without practical application. The question of what these gases might mean for human welfare, what they might offer to alleviate the burdens of illness or injury, remained largely unexplored. But knowledge, once discovered, has a way of finding unexpected applications. The careful chemical investigations of the late 18th century had created a toolkit of pure substances and experimental methods. In the coming years, a new generation of investigators would begin to explore not just what these gases were, but what they could do, particularly to the human body and mind. The stage was set for discoveries that would reach far beyond the laboratory, though no one yet suspected where this chemical curiosity would ultimately lead. The turning of the century brought with it a young man whose boundless curiosity would illuminate the properties of a peculiar gas. Humphry Davy arrived at the Pneumatic Institution in Clifton, near Bristol, in the autumn of 1798, just 20 years old but already displaying the experimental vigor that would define his career. The institution had been established by Thomas Beddoes, a physician convinced that different gases might cure various diseases. It was here, in these modest rooms dedicated to pneumatic medicine, that Davy would conduct experiments that opened unexpected windows into human consciousness. Nitrous oxide had been discovered just a few years earlier, but its properties remained largely mysterious. Davy approached the gas with the methodical patience of a natural philosopher, but also with a willingness to put himself directly in the path of discovery. He believed that to truly understand a substance, one must experience it firsthand. Throughout the winter months of 1798 and into 1799, he began inhaling carefully measured quantities of the gas, documenting everything he felt with meticulous attention to detail. The first sensations were subtle. A slight tingling in his limbs. A warmth spreading through his chest. But as Davy continued his experiments, increasing the concentrations and durations of exposure, the effects became more pronounced and far more intriguing. He described feeling a sense of sublime pleasure wash over him, a lightness that seemed to lift him beyond ordinary sensations. His muscles relaxed. His mind wandered into territories of thought that felt both strange and delightful. What distinguished Davy's work was not merely his willingness to experiment on himself, but his commitment to recording his experiences while they unfolded. He would sit with pen and paper nearby, inhaling the gas from silk bags specially prepared for the purpose, then attempting to capture in words the fleeting sensations that coursed through him. Sometimes friends and colleagues joined him, and Davy would observe their reactions with the same careful attention he gave to his own experiences. The poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge visited the institution and tried the gas, describing sensations of pleasure that seemed almost transcendent in nature. Through repeated trials, Davy began to notice patterns. The gas produced consistent effects, though these varied somewhat from person to person. Some experienced fits of laughter, which would eventually give nitrous oxide its popular name. Others felt a rush of ideas and connections, thoughts flowing with unusual fluidity. Nearly everyone reported a sense of well-being, a temporary lifting of cares and worries. Davy himself found that the gas could relieve the pain of an emerging wisdom tooth and soothe the inflammation in his gums. It was during these experiments that Davy made an observation that, in hindsight, seems almost prophetic. In his careful notes and in the book he would publish in 1800, he suggested that nitrous oxide appeared capable of diminishing physical pain. He had felt it himself, the way his dental discomfort seemed to fade into insignificance while under the gas's influence. He went so far as to write that the gas might be used with advantage during surgical operations, a single sentence that contained within it the seed of a revolution in medicine. Yet this observation remained just that, a passing thought in a much larger work exploring the chemical and physiological properties of nitrous oxide. Davy did not pursue the medical applications himself. Perhaps he was too young, too focused on his chemical investigations to recognize the full weight of what he had noticed. Perhaps the institution's focus on treating chronic diseases rather than acute surgical pain led him in other directions. Or perhaps the suggestion simply seemed too speculative, too far removed from the established practices of medicine to warrant serious consideration. The pneumatic institution continued its work for a few more years, but the hoped-for cures from various gases never materialized. Patients with consumption and other chronic ailments did not recover by breathing hydrogen or oxygen or nitrous oxide. The institution's financial support waned, and eventually it closed. Davy moved on to greater fame at the Royal Institution in London, where his brilliant lectures and dramatic chemical demonstrations made him one of the most celebrated scientists of his age. He would go on to discover several new elements, invent the miner's safety lamp, and receive a knighthood for his contributions to science. But the nitrous oxide experiments faded into the background of Davy's illustrious career. His book on the gas was read by other chemists and natural philosophers, admired for its careful methodology and detailed observations. Yet that single sentence about surgical applications went largely unnoticed. The medical establishment of the early 19th century had no framework for understanding how a gas might be deliberately used to prevent pain. Surgery remained as it had been for centuries, a desperate measure undertaken only when death seemed the alternative, performed with speed rather than care, endured through restraint and fortitude rather than comfort. Davy's nitrous oxide experiments had revealed something profound about the malleability of human sensation, about the possibility of altering consciousness and perception through chemical means. He had demonstrated that pain itself was not an unchangeable constant, but something that could be diminished, reshaped, even temporarily erased. The knowledge existed, documented in his published work, available to anyone who cared to read it and consider its implications. But knowledge alone does not change the world. It must find the right moment, the right circumstances, the right minds ready to see possibilities that others have overlooked. The connection between Davy's careful experiments in a Bristol laboratory and the practical needs of physicians and surgeons would take decades to form. The gas that had produced such fascinating effects in controlled settings would need to escape those confines to enter the public imagination through different channels before its medical potential could finally be recognized and acted upon. In the meantime, nitrous oxide would embark on a curious journey of its own, one that would take it far from the sober halls of scientific institutions and into spaces of entertainment and spectacle, where what had been discovered in the name of knowledge would be experienced purely for pleasure. The glass apparatus that had captivated Humphry Davy in his laboratory now began to travel beyond the walls of scientific institutions, carried by a curious transformation that would define much of the 1830s and 1840s. What had been the subject of careful scholarly inquiry was about to become something quite different, a source of wonder, amusement, and public spectacle that would spread across Britain and America like a gentle wave. The shift began gradually, as these things often do. Young men who had witnessed chemical demonstrations at universities or scientific societies found themselves retelling their experiences at dinner parties and social gatherings. The peculiar effects of nitrous oxide made for excellent stories, and in an era before modern entertainment, people were eager for novel experiences. Soon, someone had the enterprising idea that these demonstrations need not remain confined to academic settings. By the 1830s, traveling lecturers had discovered that chemistry could draw paying audiences. These were not trained scientists for the most part, but educated individuals who understood that the public possessed both curiosity about natural philosophy and a desire to be entertained. They would arrive in a town, rent a hall, and advertise an evening of scientific wonders. Among the various demonstrations of electricity, magnetism, and chemical reactions, the administration of nitrous oxide became a particular favorite. The format of these exhibitions followed a comfortable pattern. The demonstrator, often styled as a professor or doctor regardless of actual credentials, would begin with a lecture explaining the nature of gases and the remarkable properties of this particular substance. Scientific terminology lent authority to the proceedings, and audiences appreciated feeling they were learning something valuable even as they anticipated the entertainment to come. Then would come the invitation for volunteers. Members of the audience, usually young men seeking to impress their companions or simply curious about the experience, would step forward. The demonstrator would produce a bag made of oiled silk or rubberized fabric, fitted with a wooden mouthpiece. The volunteer would breathe deeply from this apparatus, and within moments, the transformation would begin. What followed never failed to delight the watching crowd. The person who had just moments before been an ordinary member of the audience might begin to laugh uncontrollably, or to dance about the stage with exaggerated movements. Some became talkative, speaking rapidly about whatever thoughts entered their minds. Others grew philosophical or attempted to sing. A few simply smiled with profound contentment, swaying gently as if hearing distant music. The effects typically lasted only a few minutes before fading, leaving the volunteer often with little memory of their behavior and the audience thoroughly amused. In drawing rooms of more fashionable society, nitrous oxide parties became an accepted form of entertainment. A host might arrange for a small apparatus to be brought in after dinner. Guests would take turns experiencing the gas while their friends observed the results. These gatherings had an air of sophistication about them, a sense that participants were engaging with the latest scientific developments while enjoying themselves. The experience was considered harmless and temporary, a brief journey into an altered state that left no lasting effects beyond the stories told afterward. In America, these exhibitions found particularly fertile ground. The young republic had developed a taste for self-improvement and democratic access to knowledge. Traveling lecturers moved from town to town, following circuits that might span several states. They would post handbills announcing their arrival, promising an evening of education and amazement. In communities where entertainment options were limited, these events could draw substantial crowds. One of the most successful of these itinerant demonstrators was a man named Gardner Quincy Colton, though he would not rise to prominence until the early 1840s. Others whose names have been less well preserved by history traveled similar routes throughout the 1830s, carrying their silk bags and chemical apparatus from New England to the frontier settlements of the expanding nation. The demonstrators learned through experience how to make their exhibitions more dramatic. They discovered that having multiple volunteers inhale the gas simultaneously created a more entertaining spectacle as the participants interacted with each other in their altered states. They developed patter and presentation techniques that built anticipation. Some incorporated the nitrous oxide demonstration into larger programs that included other chemical experiments and scientific curiosities. What made these exhibitions particularly notable was how they normalized the experience of inhaling a substance that altered consciousness. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of ordinary people across Britain and America had their first encounter with nitrous oxide not in a medical context but as entertainment. They learned that breathing this particular gas would temporarily change how they felt and perceived the world, and that this change was reversible and, in the social context of a public exhibition or private party, quite acceptable. The demonstrators themselves generally had little interest in medical applications. They were in the business of entertainment and education, not healing. If they mentioned Humphry Davy's decades-old suggestion about possible surgical uses at all, it was typically in passing, as a bit of historical context rather than a serious proposal. The gap between amusing effect and medical application seemed vast, unbridgeable by anything these traveling lecturers might imagine. Yet in retrospect, these exhibitions were creating something important, a pool of lived experience. People who attended these demonstrations or parties carried away direct knowledge of what nitrous oxide could do. They had seen friends and neighbors rendered temporarily insensible to their surroundings, behaving in ways they would not normally behave, and then returning to normal awareness with no apparent harm done. This collective experience would prove more valuable than anyone at the time understood. As the 1830s gave way to the 1840s, these demonstrations continued unabated. The novelty never quite wore off, perhaps because each new town provided fresh audiences and because the effects remained genuinely surprising no matter how many times one witnessed them. The gas that had begun its journey in Humphry Davy's laboratory had found a new home in the public sphere, waiting for someone to see in these laughing, dancing volunteers something more than mere amusement. The transformation of chemical substances from scientific curiosities to social entertainments was not limited to nitrous oxide. In the same decades when laughing gas demonstrations drew crowds across America and Britain, another substance was making its own journey from laboratory flask to parlor amusement. Ether, that clear, volatile liquid with its peculiarly sweet and penetrating odor, was about to become the centerpiece of an entirely different kind of recreational gathering. Ether had been known to chemists for centuries, though by various names and in impure forms. By the 1830s and 1840s, it was becoming more readily available, synthesized by combining sulfuric acid with alcohol through a process that was well understood, if somewhat delicate. Unlike nitrous oxide, which required specialized equipment and knowledge to produce, ether could be obtained with relative ease by those with access to chemical suppliers. This accessibility would prove significant for what followed. The discovery that ether produced intoxicating effects when inhaled appears to have occurred independently in several places, as such discoveries often do when a substance becomes widely available. In the medical schools and professional communities of New England, ether began to acquire a reputation quite different from its intended uses as a solvent or chemical reagent. Young medical students, physicians, and other educated professionals found that breathing ether vapors produced a state of exhilaration remarkably different from the effects of alcohol. These gatherings, which became known colloquially as ether frolics or ether parties, developed their own informal rituals and customs. Unlike the public exhibitions of laughing gas, which were commercial entertainment staged for paying audiences, ether frolics were private social occasions. They took place in parlors and private rooms, among circles of friends and professional acquaintances who passed around a container of ether, breathing its vapors and experiencing the peculiar sensations that followed. The effects of inhaled ether were both similar to and distinct from those of nitrous oxide. Those who participated in these gatherings described an initial period of excitement and euphoria, often accompanied by uncontrollable laughter and a sense of physical invigoration. Some became talkative and animated, while others grew contemplative or drowsy. The experience was generally brief, lasting only a few minutes before fading as the ether dissipated from the lungs and bloodstream. Unlike alcohol, ether left little lingering effect once its immediate influence had passed. In the towns and small cities of Connecticut, Massachusetts, and other New England states, these informal gatherings became a recognized, if somewhat secretive, form of social entertainment among certain circles. The participants were often young men of education and professional standing, medical students completing their training, practicing physicians, pharmacists, and others with access to chemicals and an understanding of their properties. The frolics occupied an ambiguous social space, neither fully respectable nor entirely disreputable, tolerated with a combination of amusement and mild disapproval. What makes these recreational gatherings particularly significant in our story is not the social phenomenon itself, but rather the practical education they provided. Each ether frolic was, unknowingly, an informal experiment. Participants learned firsthand about ether's rapid onset of effects, the relatively short duration of its influence, and the generally benign nature of the experience when the substance was used in moderation. They observed how different individuals responded somewhat differently to similar exposures, how the amount inhaled seemed to correlate with the intensity of effects, and how quickly people returned to their normal state once the inhalation ceased. This accumulated experience, gained in parlors and private rooms rather than in laboratories or hospitals, created a pool of individuals who understood ether's properties through direct observation. They knew the smell that signaled ether's presence, the sensations that preceded its full effects, and the signs that someone had inhaled enough to lose their usual inhibitions and awareness. This knowledge, acquired for entertainment, would later prove medically valuable in ways the participants could not have imagined. The geographic concentration of these frolics in New England is worth noting. While ether may have been used recreationally in other regions, the documented accounts cluster particularly in Connecticut and Massachusetts. This regional concentration meant that the physicians and dentists practicing in these areas during the 1840s had unusual opportunities to become familiar with ether's effects, either through personal participation or through observations of colleagues who had attended such gatherings. Among those who encountered ether through these social contexts were several individuals whose names would later become associated with anesthesia's medical development. The connections were often indirect: a medical student who attended a frolic, a young physician who heard detailed accounts from friends, a dentist whose acquaintances described their experiences. These informal networks of shared experience created a foundation of practical knowledge about ether that existed alongside, but separate from, the formal scientific understanding of the substance's chemistry. The contrast between these private ether frolics and the public laughing gas exhibitions is revealing. Nitrous oxide demonstrations were commercial spectacles, announced in newspapers and staged before crowds of strangers who paid admission. Ether gatherings were intimate affairs, organized through personal invitation among people who knew one another. This difference in social context would influence how the two substances were perceived and, eventually, how they would be considered for medical applications. As the 1840s progressed, both forms of recreational chemical use continued in their parallel tracks. Laughing gas exhibitions remained popular public entertainments, while ether frolics persisted as private diversions among professional circles. Neither activity was undertaken with medical intent, yet both were creating circumstances that would prove crucial for the breakthrough that approached. The stage was being set, though none of the actors yet knew their roles in the drama that would unfold. In these seemingly frivolous gatherings, in the laughter and temporary euphoria of young people seeking amusement, practical knowledge was accumulating. The familiarity with ether's effects, the understanding of its rapid action and quick dissipation, the confidence that the experience was generally safe, all of this was being learned through experience rather than systematic study. Soon, someone would make the crucial connection between these recreational effects and the persistent problem of surgical and dental pain. The evening of December 10, 1844, arrived cold and clear in Hartford, Connecticut. The Union Hall had been prepared for an event that promised an evening of unusual entertainment. Professor Gardner Quincy Colton, a traveling showman with a background in medical studies, was bringing his popular laughing gas exhibition to town. Handbills posted throughout Hartford promised an evening of wonder and amusement as volunteers from the audience would inhale nitrous oxide and experience its peculiar effects before their neighbors' eyes. Among the crowd gathering in the hall that evening was a 30-year-old dentist named Horace Wells. He had brought his wife Elizabeth, looking forward to an evening's diversion from his daily work. Wells was known in Hartford as a careful, methodical practitioner who had established a successful dental practice on Main Street. Those who knew him described a man of quiet demeanor, someone who approached his profession with genuine thoughtfulness about his patients' welfare. He had recently entered into a professional partnership with a younger dentist named William Morton, and together they had been exploring various techniques to improve their practice. The lights dimmed in Union Hall as Professor Colton began his presentation. He spoke with the practiced ease of someone who had delivered this performance many times before, explaining to the audience the nature of the gas they were about to witness in action. Volunteers were invited to come forward, and several young men from the audience eagerly accepted the invitation, perhaps encouraged by friends or simply drawn by curiosity about this strange substance that promised such unusual sensations. One by one, the volunteers inhaled from the gas bag that Colton provided. The audience watched as the effects took hold, as the volunteers began to laugh, to gesture wildly, to move about the stage with the uninhibited behavior that had made these exhibitions so popular throughout New England. The crowd responded with laughter and applause, enjoying the spectacle of respectable townspeople behaving in such uncharacteristic ways. But then something happened that caught Horace Wells's particular attention. One of the volunteers, a young man named Samuel Cooley, whom Wells recognized as a clerk from a local drugstore, became especially animated under the gas's influence. In his enthusiastic movements about the stage, Cooley collided forcefully with some of the wooden benches that had been placed there. The impact was significant enough that several audience members gasped, concerned that he might have injured himself. Yet Cooley continued his exuberant display, seemingly unaware that anything had happened. He laughed and gestured with the others until the gas's effects began to fade. Only when he returned to his seat, as the evening's entertainment continued around him, did he appear to notice something amiss. Wells observed as Cooley examined his legs with a puzzled expression, apparently discovering injuries he had sustained during his time on stage. After the exhibition concluded and the audience began to disperse, Wells approached Cooley directly. The conversation between them was brief but revealing. Cooley confirmed that he had indeed injured himself during his time under the gas's influence, showing Wells the bruises and cuts on his shins. But the remarkable detail, the observation that seemed to captivate Wells's attention completely, was Cooley's assertion that he had felt nothing during the actual impact. The pain had only registered in his awareness after the gas had worn off, after his senses had returned to their normal state. For most of the audience that evening, this incident was merely a curious footnote to an entertaining show. But Wells's professional experience gave him a different perspective. As a dentist, he spent his working days inflicting necessary pain on patients who came to him with diseased or damaged teeth. He knew intimately the dread that patients felt when they climbed into his dental chair, the way they gripped the armrests and braced themselves for the inevitable discomfort. He had seen strong men pale at the prospect of an extraction, had watched patients postpone necessary treatments because they simply could not face the ordeal. The dental profession of the 1840s had few tools to offer beyond speed and sympathy. A skilled dentist took pride in working quickly, minimizing the duration if not the intensity of the pain. Some practitioners offered their patients alcohol or opium preparations, but these provided limited relief and came with their own complications. The essential nature of dental work remained unchanged. It hurt, and patients simply had to endure it. Walking home through Hartford's winter streets that evening, Wells found his thoughts returning again and again to what he had witnessed. The image of Samuel Cooley, injured but unaware, moved through his mind with the weight of possibility. Here was a substance that people inhaled for amusement at exhibitions and parties, yet it possessed a property that seemed almost miraculous from a medical perspective. If nitrous oxide could prevent someone from feeling a significant injury, even temporarily, might it not also prevent the feeling of intentional surgical intervention? The idea was not entirely without precedent in Wells's awareness. He knew something of the chemical experiments that had been conducted in earlier decades. The work of Humphry Davy was part of the general knowledge that circulated among educated professionals, even if Wells had not studied it in detail. The notion that gases might have medical applications existed in the background of scientific thought. But there remained a considerable distance between theoretical possibility and practical application, between a passing suggestion in a scientific paper and an actual technique employed in daily medical practice. What distinguished Wells in this moment was not unique knowledge, but rather a particular conjunction of experience and observation. He had been present at exactly the right time, with exactly the right professional background, to recognize the significance of what he had seen. His daily work had prepared him to understand the value of what others might dismiss as merely an amusing side effect of a recreational substance. In the days immediately following the exhibition, Wells's thoughts continued to develop along this promising path. He was not a man given to impulsive action, but neither was he content to let an idea of such potential importance simply drift away unexplored. His methodical nature, the same quality that made him a careful dentist, now directed itself toward a new question. If nitrous oxide could prevent the sensation of accidental injury, could it be deliberately employed to prevent the sensation of necessary medical intervention? And if so, how might such an application be safely and reliably achieved? The winter night deepened over Hartford as Wells made his way home, but his mind had already begun moving toward morning, toward action, toward the careful investigation of a possibility that might change everything about the way he practiced his profession. The winter morning of December 11, 1844, arrived cold and crisp in Hartford, Connecticut. Horace Wells had not slept much during the night. His mind had been turning over what he had witnessed at the laughing gas exhibition, replaying the moment when Samuel Cooley had injured his leg yet felt no pain. The memory of that observation had lodged itself firmly in Wells's thoughts, and by morning, he had reached a decision that would require considerable courage. Wells was a methodical man, not given to rash actions. But he also possessed a quality that set certain individuals apart, the willingness to test a hypothesis on himself before asking others to trust it. If nitrous oxide could truly prevent pain, he reasoned, there was only one way to know with certainty. He would need to experience it himself, under circumstances where pain would normally be undeniable. He sought out Gardner Quincy Colton, the showman who had conducted the previous evening's exhibition. Colton was preparing to leave Hartford for his next engagement, but Wells's proposal caught his attention. The dentist explained his theory and his plan. He wanted Colton to administer nitrous oxide to him while another dentist extracted one of his own teeth, a tooth that had been troubling him and was due for removal in any case. Colton, despite his experience with the gas as entertainment, had never considered such an application. Yet something in Wells's earnest certainty persuaded him to participate in this unusual experiment. Wells then approached his colleague John Riggs, a fellow dentist whom he trusted completely. He explained what he intended to do and asked Riggs to perform the extraction. Riggs initially hesitated. The idea seemed extraordinary, perhaps even reckless. But Wells was insistent, his reasoning careful and clear. If the gas could prevent pain from an accidental injury, why not from an intentional one? The logic was sound, even if the proposal was unprecedented. They gathered in Wells's own dental office, a familiar space now transformed into a laboratory of sorts. The equipment was simple: Colton's portable gas apparatus, consisting of a wooden box containing a bladder filled with nitrous oxide, connected to a tube and mouthpiece. Wells settled into his own dental chair, the same chair where he had treated hundreds of patients. Now he would be the patient himself, placing his trust in an untested theory. Colton opened the valve, and Wells breathed in the gas. Those present watched as the dentist's expression began to change, his features relaxing, his eyes taking on the characteristic distant quality that nitrous oxide produced. When Colton judged the moment right, Briggs moved forward with his instruments. The extraction of a tooth was not a subtle procedure. It required forceps, pressure, and a firm pulling motion. Briggs worked quickly and efficiently, and within moments, the tooth was out. Wells remained still throughout the procedure. Then, as the effects of the gas began to fade, he opened his eyes. His first words would be remembered by everyone present. He reported feeling no pain during the extraction, perhaps a slight sensation of pressure, but nothing that could be called suffering. The relief and excitement in his voice were unmistakable. He examined the extracted tooth in wonder, then reportedly declared it a new era in tooth pulling. The success of this self-experiment filled Wells with a sense of purpose and possibility. He had felt something he had long dreamed of, or a way to spare his patients the fear and agony that made them dread his office. But Wells was too careful a practitioner to consider his work complete after a single trial. He needed to verify that what had worked for him would work for others, that his own experience was not somehow exceptional or fortunate. Over the following days and weeks, Wells began offering nitrous oxide to patients in his Hartford practice who required extractions. He acquired his own apparatus for generating and storing the gas, learning the practical details of its preparation and administration. Each patient who agreed to try this new approach became part of an expanding body of evidence. Wells kept careful notes, documenting how much gas each patient received, how long the effects lasted, and what sensations they reported afterward. The results were encouraging. Patient after patient underwent extractions without the expected distress. Some reported strange dreams or pleasant sensations during the procedure. Others remembered nothing at all between breathing the gas and waking to find the tooth already removed. A few experienced incomplete pain relief, which taught Wells that the dosage and timing required careful attention. But the overall pattern was clear: nitrous oxide could reliably prevent the pain of dental procedures. Wells's dental practice began to change in character. Word spread through Hartford that the dentist on the corner was performing painless extractions. Patients who had postponed necessary dental work for years, dreading the inevitable suffering, now found courage to seek treatment. Wells's waiting room grew busier. He found himself not just treating teeth but explaining his method to curious visitors, including physicians and other dentists who came to observe. As winter progressed into the early months of 1845, Wells's conviction grew stronger. He had now administered nitrous oxide dozens of times with consistent success. His careful record showed patterns and principles that could be taught to others. This was not merely a curious phenomenon or a fortunate accident, it was a reproducible medical technique with profound implications. If nitrous oxide could eliminate pain from dental extractions, might it not also be applicable to surgical procedures? The possibilities seemed vast. Yet Wells remained aware that his discovery, as he increasingly thought of it, was known only in Hartford. The broader medical community had no knowledge of what was happening in his small Connecticut practice. If nitrous oxide was to fulfill its potential to reduce human suffering, the technique would need to be demonstrated to the physicians and surgeons who performed more extensive procedures. It would need to be validated in the great medical centers where new techniques were evaluated and adopted. The thought of bringing his discovery to wider attention both excited and unsettled Wells. He was not a man who sought fame or attention. His satisfaction came from the quiet gratitude of patients who left his office without the trauma they had expected. But he also felt a responsibility that extended beyond his own practice. If he had indeed found a way to spare people from pain, did he not have an obligation to share that knowledge? These thoughts occupied Wells's mind as he continued his daily work, breathing the gas into one patient after another, extracting teeth that came away with remarkable ease, and seeing expressions of relief and amazement on faces that had entered his office tense with dread. Boston, he thought. Massachusetts General Hospital, where the leading surgeons of New England practiced. That was where a demonstration would carry weight, where the medical establishment would take notice. The seed of a plan was forming, though Wells did not yet fully grasp how much would depend on a single, perfect demonstration. The journey from Hartford to Boston in January 1845 must have felt both exhilarating and daunting for Horace Wells. Behind him lay weeks of careful work in his dental practice, successful procedures where patients had experienced no pain during tooth extractions. Before him stretched the opportunity to demonstrate his discovery to the most prestigious medical minds in New England. Massachusetts General Hospital represented the pinnacle of surgical expertise, and its physicians could validate what Wells believed he had found, spreading the knowledge that might relieve countless people from suffering. Wells had not embarked on this journey rashly. He had approached his former student and business associate, William Morton, who was now studying medicine in Boston. Through Morton's connections, particularly his relationship with the prominent physician and geologist Charles Jackson, arrangements were made for Wells to present his work to Dr. John Collins Warren and the surgical community at the hospital. The prospect of demonstrating before such an audience would make any practitioner nervous, but Wells had reason for confidence. The nitrous oxide had worked reliably in his Hartford practice. Patients had sat calmly through extractions that would normally have caused them to grip the chair arms in anticipation of pain. The demonstration was arranged in the hospital's surgical amphitheater, the distinctive circular room where medical students and physicians gathered to observe procedures. The tiered seating allowed dozens of observers to watch surgical techniques, making it the perfect venue for showcasing a new method. Wells would perform a tooth extraction on a volunteer patient while under the influence of nitrous oxide, and the assembled physicians would witness firsthand what Wells had been documenting in his practice. The atmosphere in such spaces was always one of serious attention mixed with professional skepticism. These were men who had seen countless proposals for medical innovations, many of which proved disappointing or entirely without merit. Surgery in this era still meant holding patients down or rushing through procedures as quickly as possible. Any claim that pain could be eliminated would naturally meet with doubt. But it would also meet with hope, for every surgeon in that room knew the horror their patients endured. Wells administered the nitrous oxide to his volunteer using the apparatus he had brought from Hartford. The sweet-smelling gas flowed through the breathing bag as it had in his previous successful cases. He waited for the signs he had learned to recognize: the flushed cheeks, the relaxed posture, the dreamy expression that indicated the gas had taken effect. Then, with the observers watching intently, Wells proceeded to extract the tooth. What happened next would become a matter of some dispute in the various accounts that survived. The patient made sounds during the extraction. Whether these were cries of pain or merely involuntary vocalizations remained unclear, but to the audience of experienced surgeons, they seemed to indicate that the procedure had caused discomfort. When the extraction was complete and the effects of the gas had worn off, the patient's own report was ambiguous. Some witnesses recalled him saying he felt little or no pain, while others remembered him acknowledging some sensation. In the precise, demanding environment of a medical demonstration, ambiguity was not success. The observers had expected to see a patient who showed no response whatsoever to what should have been a painful procedure. Instead, they had witnessed something that looked uncomfortably similar to what they saw in their ordinary practice. The response from the assembled physicians was disappointment mixed with dismissive remarks. Someone reportedly called it a humbug, that particular word of the era used to describe frauds and deceptions. For Wells, standing before these distinguished men with his apparatus and his sincere belief in what he had discovered, the moment must have been crushing. He had traveled from Hartford with such careful preparation. He had performed successful procedures in his own practice. Yet here, in the venue that mattered most, something had gone differently. Perhaps the patient had not inhaled enough gas. Perhaps individual variation in response had played a role. Perhaps the nervousness of performing before such an audience had affected Wells's administration of the nitrous oxide. Whatever the reason, the demonstration had not achieved its purpose. Wells returned to Hartford, and the immediate consequence of that unsuccessful demonstration was that the medical establishment in Boston did not pursue nitrous oxide further. Wells himself continued to believe in what he had observed in his own practice, but the professional validation he had sought had eluded him. The setback would prove temporary for the broader quest to conquer surgical pain, though Wells could not have known that as he made his disappointed journey home. The story of that demonstration reminds us how discovery rarely follows a straight path. Wells had made genuine observations about nitrous oxide's effects. His careful self-experimentation and subsequent dental work had revealed real possibilities. But the translation of private success to public validation involved variables that even the most prepared practitioner could not entirely control. The response of a single patient on a single day, before a demanding audience, had consequences that rippled outward. In the quieter moments after returning to his practice, Wells might have wondered what had gone differently that day. His record showed successful procedures. His patients in Hartford could attest to extractions performed without the expected pain. Yet the moment that mattered most, the demonstration that could have brought his work to the attention of the surgical world, had ended in professional embarrassment. The setback would not mark the end of the story, though Wells himself could not fully see the path forward from that January day. His observation at the laughing gas exhibition had been sound. His experiments had revealed genuine effects. But the road from private discovery to accepted medical practice would prove more complicated than a single demonstration could resolve, and other investigators would soon approach the problem from different directions. The disappointment at Massachusetts General Hospital had sent ripples through the small community of medical innovators who had been following Horace Wells's work with nitrous oxide. Yet setbacks in scientific discovery often create unexpected openings, and the winter months following that unsuccessful demonstration would prove pivotal in ways no one could have anticipated. William Thomas Green Morton had witnessed Wells's struggles with a mixture of sympathy and curiosity. Morton was a younger man, ambitious and energetic, with a personality quite different from Wells's more cautious temperament. He had worked alongside Wells in Hartford, studying dentistry and observing the older dentist's early experiments with laughing gas. The two men had parted on reasonably good terms, but Morton had chosen to pursue his own path, establishing a practice in Boston while also studying medicine at Harvard. In the months following Wells's difficult experience, Morton found his thoughts returning to the problem of pain during dental procedures. His practice brought him face to face daily with patients who dreaded the extraction of teeth, who postponed necessary treatments until infections became unbearable, who gripped the arms of his dental chair with white knuckles. He had seen Wells's initial successes with nitrous oxide, and he understood that the concept itself held merit, even if the Boston demonstration had faltered. Morton's approach to solving this problem reflected his personality. Where Wells had been methodical and cautious, Morton was more willing to seek advice and collaborate. He reached out to Charles Thomas Jackson, a prominent chemist and physician who taught at Harvard. Jackson was known for his wide-ranging knowledge of chemistry and his enthusiasm for discussing scientific matters. The two men began a series of conversations that would prove consequential. Jackson suggested that Morton consider ether rather than nitrous oxide. Sulfuric ether had been known to chemists and physicians for centuries, and its intoxicating properties were familiar to many medical students through those informal social gatherings that had become popular in New England. Jackson himself had personal experience with ether's effects and believed it might offer certain advantages over nitrous oxide in terms of predictability and ease of administration. Morton listened carefully to Jackson's suggestions, but he was not content to simply accept advice without verification. Throughout the spring and summer of 1846, he began his own systematic investigation. He obtained pure sulfuric ether and started conducting experiments, approaching the work with a combination of scientific curiosity and practical purpose. His first subjects were animals. In the privacy of his rooms, Morton carefully administered ether to his pet spaniel and to goldfish swimming in a bowl, observing how the vapors affected them, how long the effects lasted, and how the creatures recovered. These initial trials gave him confidence that ether could indeed produce a state of insensibility that was both reversible and relatively safe. But Morton understood that animal experiments could only take him so far. If ether was to be useful in dental practice, he needed to know its effects on human subjects with precision. In a decision that required considerable courage, he began experimenting on himself. In the quiet of his laboratory, he would inhale ether vapors, carefully noting the sensations, the timing, and the after effects. He experienced the same progression that Humphry Davy had documented decades earlier with nitrous oxide: the initial sweet taste, the sense of euphoria, the gradual fading of awareness. These self-experiments were not reckless adventures but calculated investigations. Morton was trying to understand dosage, duration, and the precise quality of the insensibility that ether produced. He needed to know whether a patient under ether's influence would truly be unaware of pain, or merely unable to remember it afterward. He needed to understand how quickly a person would awaken, and whether there were lingering effects that might prove dangerous. As summer turned to autumn, Morton felt ready to attempt a practical application. He selected a patient carefully, a man who needed a tooth extracted and who agreed to try this experimental approach. On September 30th, 1846, in his dental office in Boston, Morton administered ether to his patient using a simple apparatus, a glass container with a tube that allowed the patient to inhale the vapors. The extraction proceeded without apparent pain, and the patient recovered well. Morton repeated the procedure with other dental patients over the following days, refining his technique with each case. He was discovering practical details through experience: how much ether to use, how long to wait before beginning the procedure, how to recognize when a patient had reached the appropriate depth of insensibility. Each successful case added to his confidence and his understanding. Yet Morton recognized that dental extractions, however painful, were relatively brief procedures. The true test of ether's potential would come in surgery, in those longer and more invasive operations that represented medicine's greatest challenge to human endurance. He knew that hospital surgeons had heard about Wells's disappointing demonstration, and convincing them to try again with a different agent would require careful preparation. Morton consulted again with Jackson about the purity of the ether and the best methods of administration. He also began quietly making inquiries at Massachusetts General Hospital, the same institution where Wells had faced difficulty. Morton learned that the hospital surgeons, despite their previous experience, remained interested in the possibility of controlling surgical pain. They had not closed their minds to the concept, merely to that particular demonstration. Through connections and persistent inquiry, Morton secured an opportunity that would prove historic. The hospital agreed to allow him to demonstrate ether during an actual surgical procedure. As autumn deepened and October arrived, preparations began for a public trial that would take place in the hospital's surgical amphitheater, the same domed room where medical students and physicians gathered to observe operations. Morton prepared his apparatus with care, ensuring that everything would function smoothly. He obtained the purest ether available and tested his delivery device repeatedly. He was acutely aware that this demonstration would be observed by Boston's leading surgeons, men whose opinions carried weight throughout the medical world. Success could open new possibilities not just for his own career but for countless patients. Another failure might close the door on pain relief research for years to come. The date was set for October 16, 1846, a Friday morning when autumn light would stream through the amphitheater's windows, illuminating a moment that would divide surgical history into before and after. The morning of October 16, 1846, arrived in Boston with the characteristic chill of early autumn. In a neighborhood near the Charles River, William Morton awoke with the weight of the coming day pressing upon him. He had sent word to Massachusetts General Hospital that he was ready to demonstrate his technique, and the surgical staff had agreed to allow him this opportunity. Unlike the informal experiments he had conducted in his dental office over the preceding weeks, this demonstration would take place before some of the most respected surgeons in New England. Morton dressed carefully that morning, his movements deliberate and measured. He gathered the apparatus he had designed for delivering ether vapor, a glass globe with carefully positioned openings that would allow a patient to inhale the substance in a controlled manner. The device represented weeks of thoughtful refinement, adjustments made after each private trial in his dental practice. He had tested it on himself, on willing acquaintances, and on dental patients seeking relief from tooth extractions. Each experience had taught him something about dosage, about timing, about the delicate balance between achieving insensibility and maintaining safety. The hospital stood on a hill overlooking the city, its brick facade solid and imposing in the morning light. Inside its walls, the surgical amphitheater waited, a room designed so that medical students and physicians could observe operations from tiered seating that rose in a semicircle around the operating area. This architectural arrangement served the teaching mission of the hospital, allowing many observers to witness surgical techniques. On this particular morning, that same arrangement would mean that Morton's demonstration would have an audience of considerable size. Morton arrived at the hospital carrying his glass inhaler, but he was late. The scheduled time had passed, and in the amphitheater, surgeon John Collins Warren had already prepared to begin the procedure without the promised anesthetic. Warren, a man in his late 60s with decades of surgical experience, had seen many proposed innovations come and go. He had been present for Horace Wellesley's unfortunate demonstration 2 years earlier, when the dentist's attempt to show nitrous oxide's effects had not produced the hoped-for result. Warren had reasons to be skeptical, yet he had agreed to allow Morton this opportunity. The patient that morning was a young man named Gilbert Abbott, who had a vascular tumor on his neck that required removal. Abbott had consented to have Morton's technique attempted before the surgery began. When Morton finally entered the amphitheater, slightly breathless from his hurried journey, Warren turned to him with a comment that would be remembered by those present. The surgeon's words carried a mixture of irony and invitation, acknowledging both the delay and the opportunity that remained. Morton approached Abbott and explained what would happen. He positioned the glass inhaler near the young man's face, instructing him to breathe normally through the device. The room grew quiet as observers watched vapor from the ether-soaked sponge inside the globe mix with air and enter Abbott's lungs with each breath. Minutes passed, longer than the brief moments it took to position a patient for surgery, long enough that some in the audience might have shifted in their seats, wondering if this demonstration would prove any more successful than Welles's had been. Gradually, Abbott's breathing changed, becoming deeper and more regular. His body relaxed against the operating chair, and his eyes closed. Morton observed these signs with the attention he had developed through his private experiments. He recognized the state he had learned to identify, that threshold between wakefulness and insensibility. After several minutes, he stepped back and turned to Warren with words that have echoed through medical history in various remembered forms, indicating that the surgeon could proceed. Warren took up his instruments and made the first incision. Abbott did not cry out. He did not struggle or require the restraints that typically helped hold surgical patients still during procedures. His body remained relaxed as Warren worked to remove the tumor from his neck. The surgeon, whose hands had performed countless operations over his long career, continued his work in an atmosphere utterly different from the usual tension of the operating theater. The procedure lasted several minutes, and throughout it, Abbott showed none of the typical responses to surgical cutting. When Warren completed his work and the final sutures were placed, he stepped back and waited for the patient to emerge from the state Morton's ether had induced. As the effects gradually wore off, Abbott's eyes opened. He looked around at the faces watching him, and when questioned, he reported that he had felt nothing during the operation. He had been aware of some sensation, he said, but no pain, a distinction that seemed almost impossible to those who had witnessed surgery's usual anguish. Warren turned to address the observers in the amphitheater. The elderly surgeon, who had spent his career working against the limitations that pain imposed on his profession, spoke words that acknowledged what they had all just witnessed. The exact phrasing varies in different accounts, but the meaning remained consistent across all tellings. He indicated that what they had seen appeared to be genuine, that this was no deception or mere entertainment. The atmosphere in the room that morning carried a quality difficult to capture in simple description. Those present had witnessed surgical procedures before, they were medical men familiar with the realities of their profession. Yet something about this particular operation struck them as fundamentally different. The absence of the patient suffering changed not just the procedure itself but the very nature of what they understood surgery to be. Morton's demonstration succeeded where Wells's had faltered, though the reasons for the different outcomes would be discussed and analyzed in the months and years to follow. The ether had produced the insensibility Morton had promised, and the surgical team at Massachusetts General Hospital recognized that they had observed something significant. In the days immediately following, Warren and his colleagues would conduct additional operations using Morton's technique, testing whether this first success could be reliably repeated. As Morton left the hospital that October day, the glass inhaler carefully packed for transport, he could not have fully grasped how quickly the news of what had occurred would spread beyond Boston's boundaries. Letters would soon be written, conversations would take place in medical societies, and newspaper editors would learn of the event. The demonstration in that surgical amphitheater would become a reference point, a moment that physicians and historians would return to again and again when tracing the path by which surgery was transformed from an ordeal of desperate speed into a practice that could proceed with careful precision, unburdened by a patient's agony. The morning of October 17, 1846, dawned on a world that had changed overnight, though most people didn't yet know it. At Massachusetts General Hospital, the surgeons and students who had witnessed William Morton's demonstration the previous day carried with them a profound awareness that something remarkable had occurred. But how does such news travel in an age without telephones or internet, when information moves at the speed of horses and ships? Henry Bigelow, a young surgeon who had been present in the operating theater, understood immediately that he had witnessed medical history. Even before the week was out, he sat down to write a detailed account of what he had seen. His letter traveled to the offices of the Boston Medical and Surgical Journal, where editors read his careful description of a patient who had slept peacefully through the removal of a tumor, awakening with no memory of pain. The journal published Bigelow's report on November 18th, and suddenly the demonstration that had occurred in one operating room became knowledge shared across New England. But written accounts in medical journals were only one way the news spread. Doctors talked to other doctors. Visitors to Boston returned home with stories of what they had heard. Within days of Morton's demonstration, other surgeons at Massachusetts General began requesting his services for their own operations. The hospital surgeons, normally cautious and conservative, found themselves eager to try this new approach. Morton arrived with his specially designed glass inhaler, and patients breathed in the ether vapor before their procedures. The pattern repeated itself, Case after case, each one adding to the growing evidence that the October 16th demonstration had not been a fortunate accident. Letters crossed the young nation by postal routes and steamship lines. A surgeon in New York received correspondence from a colleague in Boston. Within weeks, physicians at medical colleges in Philadelphia were discussing the Massachusetts reports. The medical community, scattered across cities and towns connected by uncertain roads and seasonal waterways, began to share in the excitement of possibility. Each letter writer tried to capture in words what seemed almost impossible to convey, that the ancient companion of surgery, the pain that had limited what surgeons dared attempt, might now be held at bay. The news traveled fastest where communication networks were strongest. Boston's position as a hub of medical education and publishing gave the discovery natural pathways to spread. Doctors who had trained at Massachusetts General and moved to other cities maintained correspondence with their former colleagues. Medical students returned home for holidays carrying stories of what they had witnessed or heard about from reliable sources. In the interconnected world of American medicine, where professional reputation depended on staying current with the latest advances, such news traveled as rapidly as the infrastructure of the time allowed. By December, just 2 months after Morton's demonstration, surgeons in several American cities had obtained their own supplies of ether and begun their own trials. The sweet-smelling liquid was not difficult to acquire. Chemists had been producing it for years, primarily for other purposes. What was new was the understanding of how to administer it effectively and the recognition that it could create a state in which surgery became possible without the suffering that had always accompanied it. Across the Atlantic Ocean, the news traveled more slowly but no less certainly. Ships carrying mail and newspapers departed Boston Harbor bound for Liverpool and other British ports. The journey took weeks, but the information they carried would transform European medicine as profoundly as it was changing American practice. In London, medical journals reprinted the American reports. British surgeons, reading these accounts in their offices and libraries, must have felt the same mixture of skepticism and hope that their American counterparts had experienced. The first ether administration in Britain occurred in December of 1846 at University College Hospital in London. Robert Liston, one of Britain's most renowned surgeons, known for his remarkable speed with the knife, a crucial skill in the era before anesthesia, prepared to amputate a patient's leg. Before beginning, he turned to those assembled and spoke words that acknowledged the magnitude of the moment. The patient inhaled ether vapor, and Liston performed the operation on an unconscious man. Afterward, the surgeon announced to his observers that this procedure had eliminated the need for the speed that had defined his entire career. The news spread through London's medical community with the same rapid intensity it had shown in Boston. In Paris, where medical education and surgical technique had reached high levels of refinement, French surgeons received the reports from America and Britain with intense interest. By January of 1847, Parisian hospitals were conducting their own ether demonstrations. The French medical press published accounts and analyses, adding European observations to the growing body of knowledge about this new practice. What makes this rapid spread remarkable is not just the speed, though that was impressive by the standards of the time, but the willingness of the medical community to embrace a practice so completely new. Surgery had been performed in essentially the same manner for centuries. The relationship between surgeon and patient, the acceptance of pain as an inevitable component of healing, the very nature of what surgery meant, all of this had seemed as fixed as the movements of the stars. Yet within months of Morton's demonstration, surgeons across America and Europe were fundamentally changing their practice based on reports from a single operating theater in Boston. The letters and journal articles that carried the news also carried questions. How much ether should be given? How long should patients inhale the vapor? Were there risks that hadn't yet been discovered? What types of operations were suitable for this approach? The correspondence that flew between cities wasn't just spreading news of a discovery, it was beginning the collective process of learning how to use this new tool safely and effectively. Surgeons shared their successes and their concerns, building a body of practical knowledge through accumulated experience. In these early months, as the news traveled and the practice spread, there was a sense of possibility that extended beyond the immediate medical implications. Observers recognized that something fundamental had shifted in humanity's relationship with suffering. The pain that had been considered an inescapable part of medical treatment, that had caused countless people to delay or refuse needed operations, that had defined the limits of surgical ambition, this pain could now be prevented. The implications would take years to fully understand, but in those first months, as the news traveled from city to city and across oceans, there was simply wonder at what had become possible. The news from Boston had crossed oceans and mountains, reaching medical men in cities large and small. Now came the practical matter of putting this knowledge to use. In the weeks and months following that October demonstration, surgeons and physicians found themselves in unfamiliar territory. They had a tool that promised to transform their profession, but no instruction manual accompanied it. No standardized technique existed. No established protocols guided them. Each practitioner had to discover for themselves how to harness this remarkable substance. In Philadelphia, a surgeon named John Barton read the detailed accounts from Boston with intense interest. He had spent decades performing operations while patients were held down by assistants, their cries echoing through hospital corridors. The possibility of silence, of calm, seemed almost too extraordinary to believe. Yet the reports were consistent and came from respected sources. Within days of receiving the news, Barton arranged to procure some ether and began his own trials. His first attempt, in late November of 1846, was cautious. He administered the vapor carefully, watching his patient's responses with the attentiveness of someone navigating completely uncharted waters. The operation proceeded successfully, and Barton immediately documented every detail he could remember about the administration process, the quantity used, and the patient's recovery. In New York, surgeons at other hospitals were conducting similar experiments. Each institution developed slightly different approaches based on their initial experiences and the particular preferences of their medical staff. Some physicians favored saturating a sponge with ether and holding it near the patient's face. Others preferred cloth dampened with the liquid. Still others experimented with simple glass containers that allowed patients to inhale the vapors more directly. There was no consensus yet about which method worked best, and indeed, each approach seemed to have advantages and drawbacks that were only becoming apparent through repeated use. The question of how much ether to administer proved particularly vexing. Too little, and the patient remained conscious of pain. Too much, and concerning symptoms appeared that frightened the attending physicians. The balance seemed delicate, and it varied considerably from one person to another. A dose that produced perfect insensibility in one patient might barely affect another. Age, body size, and individual constitution all seemed to play roles, but the relationships weren't yet understood. Physicians found themselves relying heavily on observation, watching for signs that adequate depth of unconsciousness had been achieved while remaining alert for indications that they had gone too far. The ether itself presented challenges that hadn't been immediately obvious during Morton's demonstration. The substance had an intensely sharp, distinctive smell that many patients found unpleasant. Some reacted to the initial inhalation with coughing or struggling, making the induction of unconsciousness more difficult. The vapor irritated throats and airways, causing discomfort even as it produced its desired effect. A few patients experienced nausea and vomiting during recovery, an unwelcome complication that physicians had to learn to anticipate and manage. These practical difficulties meant that administering ether required patience and skill, qualities that varied among practitioners. In London, the news from America arrived in December and created immediate excitement in surgical circles. Robert Liston, one of Britain's most renowned surgeons, known for his remarkable speed in performing amputations, arranged to test ether at University College Hospital just before Christmas. His successful demonstration before a theatre full of observers convinced many British physicians that the reports from Boston were genuine. Yet Liston and his colleagues quickly encountered the same questions that were puzzling their American counterparts. How should the apparatus be designed? What concentration of vapor was optimal? How could one ensure consistent results? Different hospitals began developing their own preferred techniques and equipment. Some surgeons commissioned specialized glass vessels from instrument makers. Others worked with cloth masks designed to hold ether soap material close to the patient's face. A few innovative practitioners experimented with leather devices or metal containers, each hoping to improve upon the simple methods that had been used initially. This diversity of approaches reflected the genuine uncertainty that existed. No one yet knew the ideal way to administer ether, and so experimentation flourished in many directions at once. The speed of adoption varied considerably. Some surgeons embraced ether immediately, using it for virtually every operation they performed. Others remained more cautious, reserving it for particularly difficult or lengthy procedures while continuing to operate without it in simpler cases. A few physicians remained skeptical altogether, concerned about risks they couldn't yet fully assess or uncomfortable with such a dramatic departure from traditional practice. Within the medical community, discussions and debates began to emerge about when ether should and shouldn't be used, though evidence to guide these decisions remained limited. Patients themselves had varying reactions to the prospect of ether anesthesia. Many eagerly accepted the opportunity to avoid surgical pain, grateful for any relief medical science could offer. Others approached it with apprehension, uncomfortable with the idea of complete unconsciousness or worried about entrusting themselves so completely to physicians while in an insensible state. Some religious individuals questioned whether it was proper to circumvent pain that might be divinely intended. These concerns meant that physicians sometimes found themselves not just administering a new medical technique, but also reassuring anxious patients about its safety and appropriateness. Medical journals began publishing accounts of ether's use, creating an informal network of shared experience. A surgeon in Boston would describe his technique and results. A physician in Philadelphia would respond with observations from his own cases, noting similarities or differences. Practitioners in London would contribute their experiences with British patients. Gradually, through this accumulation of published cases and correspondence, a collective body of knowledge began to form. Patterns emerged. Certain approaches seemed more reliable than others. Particular complications appeared with enough frequency that physicians learned to anticipate and prepare for them. Yet even as ether use expanded, questions multiplied as quickly as answers emerged. How did ether actually work? By what mechanism did it produce unconsciousness? Were there patients for whom it was particularly dangerous? Could it be used safely in children, in the elderly, in people weakened by disease? The enthusiastic adoption of this new tool was accompanied by a growing awareness of how much remained unknown. Physicians found themselves balancing optimism about ether's benefits against uncertainty about its risks, making judgments based on limited information while knowing that each use added to medicine's collective understanding. By the spring of 1847, just months after Morton's demonstration, ether had been used in hundreds of operations across America and Europe. The transformation was remarkable in its speed, yet also incomplete in its standardization. Medical practice was changing, but it was changing in diverse ways across different cities and institutions. The story of anesthesia's adoption was not a single narrative but many parallel stories, each reflecting the particular circumstances, personalities, and choices of the physicians and patients involved. And alongside this rapid spread of practical application, another story was developing, one involving claims and counterclaims, recognition and resentment, questions of priority and credit that would prove remarkably difficult to resolve. The success of ether anesthesia in operating theaters across America and Europe brought with it an unexpected complication that had nothing to do with medicine and everything to do with human nature. As surgeons celebrated their newfound ability to operate on pain-free patients, a different kind of discord emerged in the background. The question of who deserved recognition for this remarkable discovery became a matter of intense debate, public and personal anguish. William Morton, who had demonstrated ether so successfully at Massachusetts General Hospital, naturally considered himself the discoverer. He had been the one standing in that amphitheater, the one who had administered the substance, the one who had faced the assembled surgeons and staked his reputation on the outcome. In the weeks following that October demonstration, Morton moved quickly to secure what he believed was rightfully his. He filed for a patent, hoping to control the use of ether and, not incidentally, to profit from its application in every hospital and surgical practice. But Morton's claim did not stand alone in the medical landscape. Charles Jackson, the chemist Morton had consulted during his experiments, came forward with his own assertion. Jackson maintained that he had been the true intellectual force behind the discovery. Had he not suggested ether to Morton in the first place? Had he not provided the chemical knowledge that made the demonstration possible? Jackson argued that Morton had been merely the demonstrator of ideas that originated in Jackson's laboratory and mind. The dispute between Morton and Jackson played out in medical journals, legal proceedings, and public forums. Each man gathered supporters who vouched for his version of events. Friends testified about conversations and consultations. Letters were produced as evidence. The medical community found itself observing a spectacle that grew increasingly uncomfortable as two men who had once worked together now attacked each other's integrity and claims. Then Horace Wells emerged from his disappointment in Hartford. Wells reminded anyone who would listen that he had been using nitrous oxide for dental procedures before Morton had ever considered ether. His failed demonstration at Massachusetts General Hospital had been unfortunate, certainly, but it did not erase the fact that he had grasped the essential concept first. Wells had seen the possibility of using gases to eliminate surgical pain. He had tested the idea on himself. He had successfully treated patients. That his particular substance and his particular demonstration had not achieved lasting recognition did not diminish his priority in conceiving the entire approach. Wells's claim carried considerable weight among those who knew the full history. His supporters pointed out that Morton had actually worked in Wells's dental practice and would have been exposed to Wells's ideas about pain-free dentistry. The line between inspiration and independent discovery became blurred and contested. Wells himself grew increasingly bitter as he watched Morton receive accolades for what Wells believed was fundamentally his own insight, merely executed with a different substance. As if three claimants were not sufficient, a fourth voice joined the chorus. Crawford Long, a physician practicing in rural Georgia, quietly revealed that he had been using ether to perform minor surgery since 1842, for years before Morton's famous demonstration. Long had not published his results or sought recognition at the time. He had simply used the technique in his country practice, removing small tumors and performing other procedures on patients rendered insensible by ether inhalation. Long's claim introduced yet another dimension to the question of discovery. He had clear documentation of his early use of ether. Witnesses confirmed his surgical applications. But Long himself acknowledged that he had not recognized the broader significance of what he was doing. He had not attempted to spread the technique or to inform the wider medical community. His work had remained isolated, a local practice unknown beyond his immediate circle until the controversy over Morton's demonstration prompted him to come forward. The debate over credit became more than an academic question when financial considerations entered the picture. Morton's patent attempt meant that the question of who discovered anesthesia had monetary implications. Hospitals and surgeons resisted paying fees to use a technique that some believed should be freely available to relieve human suffering. Morton argued that he deserved compensation for the time, expense, and risk he had undertaken to develop and demonstrate the technique. His opponents countered that patenting a medical discovery was ethically questionable, particularly one of such profound importance to humanity. The United States Congress became involved, considering whether to award financial recognition to the discoverer of anesthesia. But which discoverer? Committees heard testimony from all the claimants. Medical experts weighed in with opinions. The proceedings dragged on for years without resolution, as representatives found themselves unable to determine whose claim deserved endorsement. The question proved too tangled, too contested, too complicated for a definitive answer. In the European medical centers, observers watched the American priority dispute with a mixture of sympathy and bemusement. French and British physicians tended to take a more collective view, recognizing that surgical anesthesia had emerged from multiple lines of investigation and experimentation. They acknowledged Morton's successful public demonstration while also noting the contributions of others. The European perspective often emphasized the collaborative nature of scientific progress rather than the attribution of discovery to a single individual. The personal toll of the controversy proved severe for some of the claimants. Wells, already disappointed by his failed demonstration, found the ongoing recognition of Morton particularly painful. His dental practice suffered as he became increasingly preoccupied with asserting his priority. The cheerful, innovative dentist who had once eagerly experimented with nitrous oxide grew withdrawn and troubled, haunted by the sense that history was recording the wrong name beside a discovery he believed was fundamentally his own. Morton too found that recognition brought complications along with satisfaction. The patent disputes, the legal battles with Jackson, the financial struggles to profit from his discovery all consumed time and energy he might have devoted to medical practice. The glory he had imagined turned out to be entangled with conflict, controversy, and frustration. The question of who discovered anesthesia would never receive a definitive answer that satisfied everyone. Different observers, weighing different criteria, reached different conclusions. Was discovery about having the first idea, or making it work reliably, or demonstrating it publicly, or spreading it to the medical community? The answer depended partly on how one defined the question itself. As the months passed and anesthesia became an established part of surgical practice, the intensity of the priority dispute gradually faded, though it never entirely disappeared. And meanwhile, in Edinburgh, a Scottish physician named James Young Simpson was beginning his own experiments with a different substance, one that would add yet another chapter to anesthesia's unfolding story. As news of ether's success continued to spread through medical communities on both sides of the Atlantic, not everyone found the substance ideal for their purposes. In Edinburgh, a city renowned for its medical schools and innovation, one physician in particular began to contemplate whether there might be alternatives worth exploring. James Young Simpson was a man of considerable energy and curiosity. Born in 1811 to a baker's family in the Scottish village of Bathgate, he had risen through academic distinction to become Professor of Midwifery at the University of Edinburgh at the remarkably young age of 29. His specialty brought him face to face with a particular kind of suffering, and he had long pondered ways to ease the difficulties that women endured during childbirth. When word reached Edinburgh about the successful use of ether in surgery, Simpson began employing it in his obstetric practice. Yet he found himself dissatisfied with certain aspects of the substance. The pungent smell that clung to rooms and fabrics proved unpleasant for many patients. The irritation it caused to airways made some women cough during their deliveries. The bulky inhalers required for its administration seemed awkward in the intimate setting of a birthing room. Simpson wondered if another substance might offer similar benefits without these particular drawbacks. His home at 52 Queen Street in Edinburgh's new town became the site of systematic investigation. Simpson had a habit of inviting colleagues to join him in testing various substances that might possess anesthetic properties. These were not frivolous gatherings, but careful experiments conducted with scientific rigor, though the methods would certainly raise eyebrows by modern standards. The participants would inhale small quantities of different chemicals, noting their effects with the attention to detail that characterized Edinburgh's medical tradition. Throughout the spring and summer of 1847, Simpson and his associates tested numerous compounds, searching for something that might surpass ether's capabilities. Most proved disappointing, offering either no useful effects or unpleasant sensations that made them unsuitable for medical application. Simpson's determination, however, remained unshaken by these negative results. Each substance ruled out brought him closer to finding one that might prove valuable. The breakthrough came in November of that year. A Liverpool chemist named David Waldie mentioned to Simpson a substance called chloroform during a conversation about the search for anesthetic agents. Chloroform had been independently discovered by three chemists in the 1830s, Samuel Guthrie in America, Eugene Soubeyrand in France, and Justus von Liebig in Germany, but it had found little practical application beyond being a laboratory curiosity. Simpson obtained a sample of the clear, sweet-smelling liquid. On the evening of November 4, 1847, he gathered with his assistants, Dr. George Keith and Dr. Matthews Duncan, along with other friends, around his dining room table. They inhaled the vapors of chloroform, carefully observing the effects. What happened next passed into medical legend, though accounts vary in their details. The participants found themselves becoming drowsy, then rather suddenly losing consciousness. When they revived, they realized with considerable excitement that they had experienced something quite different from their previous experiments. Simpson wasted little time in beginning to use chloroform in his medical practice. Within days, he administered it to a woman during a difficult delivery, with results he found most encouraging. The patient experienced relief from the intense sensations of labor, and both mother and child came through the birth safely. Simpson quickly began employing chloroform with other patients, building a body of experience with the new substance. He possessed not only scientific curiosity but also a gift for communication and persuasion. By the end of November, barely 3 weeks after his dining room experiment, Simpson had published a pamphlet describing chloroform's properties and advantages. He wrote with enthusiasm about its pleasant smell, the smaller quantities needed compared to ether, the rapidity with which it took effect, and the ease of administration. The substance could be placed on a handkerchief or simple cloth and held near the patient's face, requiring none of the complicated apparatus that ether demanded. The medical community's response came swiftly. Chloroform's advantages made it particularly attractive for certain applications. Surgeons appreciated its more agreeable odor and the smaller quantities required. The substance traveled well in small bottles, making it practical for physicians working outside hospital settings. Its effects came on more quickly than ethers, which some practitioners found advantageous for shorter procedures. Yet as with any new medical development, questions and concerns arose. Some physicians reported that chloroform seemed to affect the heart differently than ether did. Cases emerged where patients experienced concerning reactions. The medical journals of late 1847 and early 1848 filled with letters and articles as doctors shared their experiences, both positive and troubling, with the new agent. In Edinburgh and throughout Britain, chloroform gained favor with remarkable speed. Simpson's reputation and his persuasive writings contributed to this rapid adoption. French physicians, too, showed considerable interest in the substance. The patterns of acceptance varied somewhat between different medical communities, with some remaining loyal to ether while others embraced chloroform as their preferred agent. Simpson himself became chloroform's most ardent advocate, particularly for use in childbirth. He argued passionately that relieving the suffering of women during delivery represented a moral imperative. This position would soon draw him into debates that touched on theology, social custom, and deeply held beliefs about the nature of childbirth itself, conversations that would shape how anesthesia moved from the operating theatre into the birthing room. As 1847 drew to a close, the landscape of surgical and obstetric practice had transformed with remarkable rapidity. Just over a year had passed since Morton's October demonstration in Boston, and already physicians in multiple countries had not one but two powerful agents for preventing the sensation of pain. The questions now centered not on whether pain could be prevented, but on how best to employ these remarkable substances, which patients might benefit most from their use, and what role they should play in the various circumstances where human beings had long endured suffering as simply the unavoidable price of healing or of birth. The drawing rooms of London's fashionable society had been abuzz with conversation about chloroform since James Young Simpson's experiments became widely known. In the smoky clubs where gentlemen gathered, in the tea parlors where ladies met, the topic arose with increasing frequency. Some spoke enthusiastically about the relief from suffering that this new discovery promised. Others expressed concern, particularly when it came to one specific application that had begun to trouble the public conscience, the use of anesthesia during childbirth. The debate touched upon deeply held beliefs about the nature of pain, suffering, and particularly the experience of bringing new life into the world. Religious leaders cited ancient texts, physicians consulted their medical principles, and ordinary people wondered whether something so transformative could truly be appropriate. The discussion might have continued indefinitely, swaying back and forth without resolution, had it not been for a decision made in the most influential household in the British Empire. Queen Victoria had already given birth to several children by the early 1850s. She understood, perhaps more intimately than most, what laboring mothers endured. When she learned that chloroform might offer relief during childbirth, she took a keen interest in the possibility. The Queen was known for her practical approach to matters of health and welfare, and she followed developments in medicine with genuine curiosity. Her physician, John Snow, had emerged as one of London's foremost experts in the administration of anesthesia. Unlike many physicians who had simply adopted the new techniques with enthusiasm but little systematic study, Snow approached anesthesia as a science requiring careful measurement and precise control. He had designed improved inhalers, studied the proper dosages of both ether and chloroform, and documented his observations with meticulous care. His reputation for safe and effective anesthesia administration had grown steadily throughout the medical community. When Queen Victoria prepared for the birth of her 8th child, Prince Leopold, in April of 1853, she expressed her wish to use chloroform during the delivery. The decision was not made lightly. Her advisors discussed the matter at length. Some counseled against it, citing the ongoing debates and concerns. But the Queen remained firm in her determination, and John Snow was called upon to attend. The procedure Snow employed was measured and conservative. He did not seek to render the Queen completely unconscious, as might be done for a surgical operation. Instead, he carefully administered small amounts of chloroform on a handkerchief at intervals during the more difficult portions of labor, providing what he described as relief without removing the Queen's awareness or ability to participate in the birth. The approach required skill and constant attention, adjusting the amount based on the Queen's response and the progress of the delivery. The birth proceeded successfully, and the Queen later described the relief she had experienced with genuine appreciation. She referred to the effects as soothing and delightful, words that would be repeated countless times in the months and years that followed. When she gave birth to her 9th child, Princess Beatrice, 2 years later, she again requested Snow's services and the use of chloroform. News of the Queen's decision spread rapidly through British society and beyond. What had been a subject of heated debate suddenly found itself in a different light. If the Queen herself, the embodiment of propriety and moral authority in Victorian society, had chosen to use chloroform during childbirth, could it truly be improper? The royal endorsement did not silence all objections, but it fundamentally changed the character of the conversation. Physicians who had been uncertain about offering pain relief during childbirth now felt more confident in doing so. Women who might have hesitated to request it, fearing judgment or disapproval, found new courage to seek relief from suffering. The practice even acquired an informal name in some circles. Chloroform became known as anesthesia alla reina, anesthesia in the manner of the Queen. The impact extended beyond simple social acceptance. John Snow's careful, measured approach to obstetric anesthesia became a model for other physicians to study and emulate. His detailed records demonstrated that chloroform could be used in childbirth with attention to safety and proper technique. Other medical practitioners sought to learn his methods, understanding that skill and knowledge made the difference between helpful relief and potential danger. The religious objections that had seemed so formidable began to soften, though they did not disappear entirely. If the Queen, as the head of the Church of England, saw no conflict between her faith and the use of pain relief during childbirth, many of her subjects found their own concerns eased. Ministers who had preached against anesthesia in childbirth found their congregations less receptive to such messages. The theological arguments continued in some quarters, but they no longer dominated the public discussion as they once had. Not everyone celebrated the change. Some physicians remained skeptical, arguing that interfering with the natural process of birth carried unknown risks. A few continued to maintain that pain served important purposes during labor, helping mothers know when to push and allowing them to respond instinctively to their body signals. These were not unreasonable concerns, and they prompted useful discussions about how to use anesthesia in childbirth thoughtfully rather than routinely. The expansion of anesthesia into obstetrics also created new challenges for medical practitioners. Unlike surgery, where the patient could be rendered unconscious for a discrete procedure, childbirth unfolded over hours, requiring sustained attention and repeated administration of the anesthetic. Physicians had to develop new skills, learning to balance pain relief with the mother's need to remain aware enough to assist in the delivery. The techniques that worked well for surgical operations often needed modification for obstetric use. As the practice spread, different approaches emerged. Some physicians followed Snow's conservative method of intermittent administration. Others experimented with different timing, beginning earlier or later in labor. A few used ether instead of chloroform, despite its less pleasant qualities, because they believed it offered certain advantages. The accumulation of experience from many practitioners gradually built a body of knowledge specific to obstetric anesthesia. The royal approval of chloroform for childbirth represented more than just one woman's personal choice, influential though she was. It marked a turning point in how society thought about pain, suffering, and the appropriate use of medical interventions to improve human experience. The decision helped establish the principle that relieving pain was not merely acceptable but could be actively beneficial, a goal worthy of medical attention and scientific refinement. As the 1850s progressed, the use of anesthesia in childbirth became increasingly common, particularly in cities and among those who could afford physician-attended births. The practice would continue to evolve, techniques would improve, and debates about the best methods would persist. But the fundamental acceptance of pain relief during childbirth had been achieved, helped significantly by a Queen's practical decision to use the tools that medical science had placed within reach. With royal approval lending legitimacy to the practice of anesthesia, physicians throughout the world found themselves working with these remarkable substances on a daily basis. Yet each time they administered ether or chloroform, they faced practical challenges that made the experience less predictable than they wished. The gases themselves worked beautifully when everything went well, but the methods of delivering them remained surprisingly crude for such a transformative discovery. In those early years following the initial demonstrations, a surgeon or physician assistant might simply pour ether onto a handkerchief or sponge and hold it near the patient's face. This approach required little equipment and could be done anywhere, but it offered almost no control over how much vapor the patient actually inhaled. Too little, and the patient might awaken mid-procedure. Too much, and concerning symptoms might develop. The person holding the cloth had to rely entirely on instinct and observation, watching the patient's breathing and responsiveness while trying to maintain that delicate state between consciousness and its temporary absence. Chloroform presented similar challenges, though its potency made precision even more important. A few drops too many could lead to troubling effects, yet determining exactly how much constituted too many remained more art than science. Different patients seemed to require different amounts, and the same patient might respond differently from one day to another. Temperature affected how quickly the liquids evaporated. The depth of the patient's breathing changed how much vapor reached the lungs. 1,000 small variables influenced each administration, yet practitioners had few tools to measure or control any of them. Thoughtful physicians recognized these limitations and began designing better equipment. In London, a physician named John Snow devoted considerable attention to this problem. Snow possessed a methodical mind that sought to understand not just whether something worked, but precisely how and why it worked. He had already gained recognition for his careful investigations into disease transmission, and he brought that same analytical approach to the question of anesthesia delivery. Snow designed specialized inhalers for both ether and chloroform. His chloroform inhaler consisted of a metal chamber where the liquid could be placed, with tubes and valves that allowed the vapor to mix with air in controlled proportions. The patient breathed through a facepiece connected to this chamber, receiving a more consistent mixture than any handkerchief could provide. Snow spent countless hours testing his devices, measuring temperatures, calculating vapor concentrations, and recording results with the precision of someone who understood that lives might depend on getting these details right. Other inventors contributed their own designs. Some created elaborate glass apparatuses with multiple chambers and gauges. Others favored simpler approaches, developing wireframe masks covered with cloth that could be shaped to fit snugly over nose and mouth, creating a small enclosed space where vapors could concentrate without escaping into the surrounding air. Each design represented someone's attempt to solve the fundamental problem of delivering a consistent dose while allowing the administrator to adjust that dose as needed. In France, physicians experimented with droppers that allowed ether or chloroform to fall onto absorbent material at measured rates. By counting drops and timing intervals, they hoped to achieve greater predictability. Some developed elaborate schedules noting how many drops should be administered during the first minute, how many during the second, and so forth, attempting to create recipes that others could follow. The question of how much anesthesia to give proved endlessly complex. Physicians noticed that a robust young man might require substantially more than a frail elderly patient. Children seemed to need different amounts relative to their size than adults did. Patients who regularly consumed alcohol sometimes proved more difficult to anesthetize. Those who arrived frightened and tense often needed more than those who came calmly. Every observation added to the growing body of practical knowledge, but also revealed how much remained unknown. Surgeons learned to coordinate with whoever administered the anesthesia, developing silent communications and subtle signals. A nod might indicate readiness to begin. A raised hand might request pause while more vapor was given. In operating theaters, a rhythm developed between the surgeon focused on the procedure and the assistant focused on the patient's state, each trusting the other's expertise while remaining alert to changes. The timing of anesthesia administration became its own skill. Beginning too early meant the patient might start to emerge before surgery concluded. Beginning too late meant keeping the patient waiting in anxious anticipation. Maintaining anesthesia throughout a long procedure required constant attention, adding drops or adjusting vapor flow to match the surgical pace. And knowing when to stop required judgment about how long the effects would linger and whether the patient might experience distress during the early moments of return to consciousness. Different substances presented different timing challenges. Ether took longer to induce insensibility but wore off gradually, giving practitioners more time to adjust. Chloroform acted more quickly but could also dissipate rapidly, requiring vigilant monitoring throughout. Some physicians preferred one, some the other, often based on their personal experience and the specific circumstances of their practice. Medical journals filled with letters and articles sharing techniques and observations. A physician in Edinburgh might describe his preferred method for administering chloroform during limb surgery. A surgeon in Boston might offer thoughts on the best approach for abdominal operations. Gradually, through this informal sharing of experience, certain practices began to emerge as more reliable than others. The medical community was essentially teaching itself through collective experience, with each practitioner contributing observations to a growing pool of wisdom. Teaching hospitals began developing protocols, written guidelines that new physicians could study before attempting anesthesia administration themselves. These documents reflected accumulated experience from dozens or hundreds of cases, distilled into practical advice. They represented early attempts to standardize something that had been, just a few years earlier, completely unknown to medical practice. As equipment improved and techniques became more refined, the experience of anesthesia became gentler for patients. The early days, when induction might involve struggle and distress, gave way to smoother transitions. Physicians learned to talk patients through the process, explaining the strange sensations they would feel, reassuring them that the strangeness was expected and safe. The psychological aspects of anesthesia administration proved nearly as important as the technical ones. Through all these refinements and improvements, the fundamental marvel remained. Here was the capability to suspend consciousness temporarily and reliably, allowing surgical interventions that would have been impossible to endure otherwise. The fact that it required skill and attention to do safely made it no less remarkable. Indeed, watching physicians work to perfect these techniques revealed how seriously they took their responsibility, how determined they were to make this powerful tool as safe and effective as possible for every patient who might benefit from it. The improvements in equipment and technique that emerged through the late 1840s and into the 1850s created a foundation, but they also revealed how much remained unknown. Each time a surgeon administered ether or chloroform, they were conducting an experiment of sorts, though they might not have thought of it in those terms. Every patient responded differently. Some drifted into unconsciousness with just a few breaths. Others required prolonged inhalation before losing awareness. A dose that worked perfectly for one person might prove inadequate for another, or conversely, overwhelming. The medical journals of the period began to fill with case reports, each one a small piece in a larger puzzle. A surgeon in Manchester would describe a patient who had awakened unexpectedly during a procedure. A physician in New York would report success with a particular concentration of chloroform. From Edinburgh, there might come an account of a patient who had experienced unusual restlessness before finally succumbing to the anesthetic. These weren't dramatic discoveries, but quiet observations shared among colleagues trying to understand this new territory they had entered. What emerged gradually from this accumulation of experience was an appreciation for individual variation. Age seemed to matter, though the patterns weren't immediately clear. Children often required proportionally more anesthetic than adults, yet they also seemed to recover more quickly. The very elderly sometimes needed less, though they also appeared more vulnerable to complications. Body size played a role, but not in the straightforward way one might expect. A large, robust person might prove surprisingly sensitive to ether, while someone of smaller stature might require a substantial amount. Physicians noticed that temperament seemed somehow connected to anesthetic response, though this relationship remained mysterious. Nervous, anxious patients sometimes required more of the agent to achieve unconsciousness, as though their mental state somehow influenced the physical process. Those who had consumed alcohol regularly often proved harder to anesthetize, needing larger amounts than their abstaining counterparts. The reasons for these differences lay beyond the understanding of mid-19th century medicine, but careful observers noted the patterns and adjusted their practice accordingly. The concept of stages of anesthesia began to take shape through accumulated observation. Practitioners noticed that patients didn't simply switch from consciousness to unconsciousness like a lamp being extinguished. Instead, there was a progression. First came a period of disorientation, sometimes accompanied by excitement or even uninhibited speech and movement. Then a deepening of unconsciousness, the muscles relaxing, breathing becoming steady and regular. Push too far, however, and the breathing might become dangerously slow and shallow. Learning to recognize these stages, to know when the patient had reached the optimal depth for surgery without going beyond it, became a crucial skill. Temperature in the operating theater drew attention as well. Chloroform, in particular, seemed to behave differently on cold winter days versus warm summer afternoons. The liquid evaporated at different rates, affecting how much vapor the patient actually inhaled. Surgeons learned to adjust their technique with the seasons, using less chloroform when the room was warm, more when frost covered the windows. These weren't insights that came from theory but from practical experience, from paying attention to what worked and what didn't. The question of how long surgery could safely continue under anesthesia prompted much discussion. The early demonstrations had involved relatively brief procedures, but surgeons were attempting increasingly complex operations that might last 30 minutes, an hour, or even longer. How long could a patient safely remain unconscious? The answer, it seemed, depended on many factors. The type of anesthetic mattered. The patient's overall health played a role. The skill of the person administering the agent was crucial. Through careful observation and honest reporting, both of successes and failures, the medical community gradually developed a sense of reasonable limits. Certain warning signs became recognized as important. A patient whose lips began to turn blue needed immediate attention. If the pulse became thread and irregular, the anesthetic should be withdrawn. When breathing became too shallow or too slow, fresh air must be given. These danger signals were identified through experience, sometimes bitter experience. Medical journals published accounts not only of triumphant surgeries but also of cases where things had gone wrong, allowing others to learn from those difficult episodes. The importance of preparation came into focus. A patient who had eaten a heavy meal shortly before receiving anesthesia might vomit while unconscious, creating a dangerous situation. Physicians learned to instruct patients to fast before scheduled procedures. The position of the patient's head and body influenced both the ease of administering anesthetic and the safety of maintaining unconsciousness. A patient lying completely flat might have more difficulty breathing under deep anesthesia than one whose head was slightly elevated. Regional differences in practice emerged as communities of surgeons developed their own preferences and protocols. In some cities, ether remained the preferred agent. In others, chloroform dominated. Some practitioners favored rapid induction, giving larger amounts initially to achieve unconsciousness quickly. Others preferred a slower, more gradual approach. There was no central authority declaring one method correct and others wrong. Instead, this was medicine as practiced by independent physicians, each learning from their own experience and from colleagues they trusted. The process of recovery received increased attention as well. Some patients awakened quickly and clearly, remembering nothing of the surgery. Others emerged slowly, passing through periods of confusion or nausea. A few experienced vivid dreams or hallucinations during the transition back to consciousness. Understanding what was normal in recovery and what might signal a problem became part of the practitioner's knowledge base. Family members wanted to know what to expect, and physicians learned to prepare them for the various possibilities. International communication played a quiet but important role in this accumulation of knowledge. Letters crossed oceans carrying observations and questions. Medical journals from Boston made their way to London, while publications from Paris arrived in New York. A technique developed in Edinburgh might be modified and improved upon in Philadelphia. This wasn't rapid communication by modern standards, but it was steady and substantial. The medical community was learning collectively, building understanding through shared experience. By the mid-1850s, perhaps a decade after anesthesia's dramatic introduction, something significant had shifted. The initial excitement had settled into steady practice. Thousands of procedures had been performed under anesthesia, each one contributing to a growing body of practical knowledge. Physicians were becoming more confident, not because all questions had been answered, but because they understood better what they knew and what they didn't. The foundation was being laid for the next advances that would come. By the early 1880s, physicians had developed considerable confidence in their ability to render patients unconscious for surgery. The gases and vapors that had once seemed so mysterious now flowed predictably through delivery devices, allowing operations that would have been unimaginable just 4 decades earlier. Yet for all this progress, a significant limitation remained. Not every procedure required a patient to be entirely unconscious. Many minor operations, particularly those involving the eye, the mouth, or the surface of the skin, might benefit from a different approach entirely, one that could numb a specific area while leaving the patient awake and alert. The human eye presented a particular challenge. Its delicate structures demanded absolute stillness during surgery, yet the general anesthetics of the era often caused patients to move unpredictably, their eyes wandering or their bodies shifting at crucial moments. Surgeons performing cataract removals or other eye procedures found themselves wishing for something more targeted, something that could eliminate sensation in just the area being treated without affecting the patient's consciousness or causing the restlessness that sometimes accompanied chloroform or ether. In Vienna, a young ophthalmologist named Karl Koller contemplated this problem with increasing fascination. Working in the city's hospitals during the early 1880s, Koller had observed numerous eye surgeries and understood the difficulties firsthand. He knew that a solution would need to act quickly, penetrate the eye's sensitive tissues, and wear off without causing lasting damage. What he needed was a substance that could temporarily interrupt the eye's ability to transmit sensations of pain to the brain, affecting only the tissues it touched. Koller's interest in this question connected to work being done by a colleague, a neurologist named Sigmund Freud, who was investigating various properties of cocaine, a substance extracted from South American coca leaves. Freud had been studying cocaine's effects on mood and energy, documenting how it seemed to stimulate the nervous system in intriguing ways. During their conversations, Koller learned that one of cocaine's curious properties was its tendency to numb the tongue and mouth when tasted. This numbing quality caught Koller's attention in a way that Freud's other observations did not. While others were interested in cocaine's stimulating effects, Koller wondered about that local numbness. The summer of 1884 found Koller working with solutions of cocaine in his laboratory, carefully observing what happened when the substance came into contact with living tissue. He began with simple experiments, noting how a drop of cocaine solution on his tongue created the distinctive numbness his colleague had mentioned. But the tongue was one thing, the eye was quite another. The question that occupied his thoughts was whether cocaine could numb the eye's surface without damaging its delicate structures. With the methodical patience characteristic of good experimental work, Koller prepared a solution of cocaine and carefully applied it to the eye of a frog. He watched as the creature's eye, normally so sensitive to touch, gradually lost its reflexive response to gentle contact. The frog blinked normally, showed no signs of distress, yet did not react to stimuli that would ordinarily cause immediate withdrawal. Koller repeated the experiment with a rabbit, then a dog, observing the same remarkable effect. The animal's eyes became insensitive to touch within moments of applying the cocaine solution, and the numbness lasted long enough to be medically useful. On a September morning in 1884, Koller made the decision to test the solution on a human subject, his own eye. Standing before a mirror in his laboratory, he applied drops of cocaine solution to his cornea and waited. Within moments, that familiar feeling of his eyelid sliding over the surface of his eye began to fade. When he touched his cornea gently with a probe, he felt nothing. The surface of his eye, normally among the body's most exquisitely sensitive tissues, had become temporarily numb. He could touch it, press it gently, and experience no discomfort whatsoever. The implications crystallized immediately in Koller's mind. If cocaine could safely numb the eye without affecting vision or causing damage, it could transform eye surgery from a procedure requiring either complete anesthesia or extraordinary patient tolerance into something far more manageable. A surgeon could work on an awake, cooperative patient whose eye remained still and comfortable throughout the operation. Koller wasted little time in applying his discovery. Within days, he was using cocaine solution in actual eye surgeries, applying drops to patients' eyes before procedures and watching as they sat calmly while he worked, feeling no pain from incisions or manipulations that would ordinarily have caused intense discomfort. The patients remained fully conscious, able to follow instructions, yet entirely comfortable. The precision this allowed was remarkable. No more struggling with patients made restless by chloroform, no more eyes rolling unpredictably under ether's influence. Word of Koller's breakthrough spread with remarkable speed through the medical community. He presented his findings at an ophthalmology conference in Heidelberg in September 1884, and within weeks, physicians across Europe and America were replicating his technique. The simplicity of the method contributed to its rapid adoption. Unlike the complex apparatus required for administering ether or chloroform, cocaine anesthesia required only a solution and a dropper. Dentists, who had been among the earliest adopters of general anesthesia for decades earlier, immediately recognized cocaine's potential for their work. The mouth's accessibility made it ideal for topical application, and within months, dental practices were using cocaine solutions to numb specific teeth and surrounding tissues. Patients could sit comfortably in the dental chair, fully awake and alert, while dentists performed extractions and other procedures without causing pain. Surgeons working on other areas of the body began exploring whether cocaine might prove useful beyond the eye and mouth. They discovered that injecting cocaine solution beneath the skin could create numbness in larger areas, opening possibilities for minor surgical procedures on fully conscious patients. A small growth could be removed, a wound could be sutured, an abscess could be drained, all without requiring the patient to inhale chloroform or ether. This concept of local anesthesia represented a fundamentally different approach to the problem of surgical pain. Rather than rendering the entire person unconscious, it affected only the specific area requiring treatment. For patients, this meant avoiding the nausea, grogginess, and occasional complications associated with general anesthesia. For physicians, it meant being able to perform certain procedures in office settings rather than requiring the resources of a fully equipped surgical theater. Koller himself remained focused on ophthalmology, continuing to refine techniques for eye surgery throughout his career. He eventually emigrated to America, where he practiced in New York and watched as his discovery expanded far beyond its original application. The young physician who had wondered about numbness on the tongue had opened a door to an entirely new dimension of pain control, one that would continue to develop long after that September morning in Vienna when he first applied cocaine drops to his own eye and discovered that sensation itself could be selectively, temporarily, and safely suspended. The promise of local anesthesia had arrived with Koller's discovery, yet within a few short years, physicians found themselves facing an uncomfortable truth. The very substance that had opened such remarkable possibilities in surgery carried with it a shadow of danger and dependency. Cocaine, for all its virtues as a local anesthetic, possessed properties that extended far beyond the numbing of tissue. Patients and physicians alike began experiencing its darker effects, and the medical community recognized that their powerful new tool required careful handling, or better yet, replacement. In laboratories across Europe and America, chemists turned their attention to a pressing question: could they create a substance that retained cocaine's ability to block pain locally while leaving behind its troubling characteristics? The challenge was fundamentally one of molecular architecture. Cocaine's structure gave it certain properties, and chemists needed to understand which parts of that structure created the numbing effect and which parts created the problems. It was detective work conducted with test tubes and chemical reactions, a systematic exploration of similar compounds to find safer alternatives. The search began with careful study of cocaine's molecular structure. Chemists examined how the molecule was shaped, which chemical groups attached where, and how these arrangements might relate to the drug's various effects. They synthesized variations, changing one portion of the molecule while leaving others intact, testing each new compound to see what properties it possessed. Some variations proved ineffective. Others retained too many of cocaine's problematic qualities. The work required patience and persistence, as each new compound needed careful evaluation before the next variation could be attempted. In Germany, a chemist named Alfred Einhorn devoted considerable effort to this pursuit. Working in the early years of the 20th century, he methodically explored compounds related to cocaine's structure. His laboratory became a place of careful synthesis and testing, where each new substance was evaluated for its ability to numb tissue without producing the systemic effects that made cocaine dangerous. After testing numerous variations, Einhorn synthesized a compound in 1905 that showed remarkable promise. He called it procaine, though it would become better known by its trade name, Novocaine. Procaine possessed the essential quality physicians sought. It effectively blocked nerve signals in localized areas, creating numbness wherever it was injected. Yet it lacked cocaine's tendency to create euphoria or dependency. The compound was less toxic overall, and it broke down more readily in the body, meaning its effects remained local and temporary. When physicians began testing procaine in their practices, they found it performed admirably for dental work, minor surgical procedures, and any situation where numbing a specific area sufficed. The compound spread through medical practice with gratifying speed, offering a tool that could be used more freely and with less concern. Other chemists continued the search for additional alternatives, each new compound adding to the growing family of local anesthetics. Some proved longer lasting than procaine. Others worked better in certain types of tissue. The variety gave physicians options, allowing them to select the most appropriate anesthetic for each specific situation. This expanding pharmacological toolbox represented more than mere chemical achievement. It embodied a new relationship between chemistry and medicine, where laboratory synthesis directly served clinical needs. As safer local anesthetics became available, physicians began exploring new techniques for their application. The concept of the nerve block emerged, where anesthetic could be injected near major nerves to numb entire regions of the body. A properly placed injection could anesthetize an entire hand, or foot, or section of the face, without requiring the patient to inhale general anesthetic vapors. Dentists refined their techniques for numbing specific teeth and jaw regions. Surgeons found they could perform increasingly complex procedures using only local anesthesia for appropriate cases. The development of spinal anesthesia represented a particularly significant advance. Physicians discovered that injecting local anesthetic into the fluid surrounding the spinal cord could block sensation in the lower body while leaving the patient fully conscious. The technique required precision and understanding of anatomy, but when performed correctly, it allowed major surgery on the legs, pelvis, and lower abdomen without general anesthesia. For certain patients, particularly those whose hearts or lungs made general anesthesia risky, spinal techniques offered valuable alternatives. Epidural anesthesia followed similar principles but involved placing the anesthetic outside the membrane surrounding the spinal cord rather than within the spinal fluid itself. This approach allowed for more gradual onset and better control over the extent of numbness. The technique would eventually find particular favor in obstetrics, though its full development would take additional decades of refinement. Each variation in technique represented accumulated knowledge about anatomy, pharmacology, and the behavior of these synthetic compounds in living tissue. The availability of safer local anesthetics changed the landscape of minor surgery and dentistry profoundly. Procedures that once required the risk and recovery time of general anesthesia could now be performed with simple injections. Patients could walk into a dentist's office, have a tooth filled or extracted with nothing more than a local injection, and walk out again with full faculty intact. The convenience and safety of this approach made dental care more accessible and less dreaded. Similarly, minor surgical procedures could be performed in office settings rather than hospital operating rooms, expanding access to medical care. Throughout this period of development, physicians shared their experiences through medical journals and professional meetings. They documented which compounds worked best for different purposes, what dosages proved effective, and what complications might arise. This collective accumulation of knowledge helped establish standards and best practices. Young physicians learned not only which anesthetics to use but how to use them safely, what warning signs to watch for, and how to manage the occasional adverse reaction. The journey from cocaine to procaine and its successors illustrated a maturing relationship between chemistry and medicine. Rather than simply using substances found in nature, physicians now had access to compounds designed specifically for medical purposes, molecules crafted to maximize benefit while minimizing harm. This represented a fundamental shift in how medical tools were developed, pointing toward a future where chemistry would increasingly serve therapeutic needs. As the second decade of the 20th century progressed, local anesthesia had become firmly established in medical practice. The techniques continued to evolve, the compounds continued to improve, and physician skill in their application continued to grow. Yet alongside this progress in local methods, the practice of general anesthesia was also developing in important ways. The field was beginning to recognize that administering anesthesia required not just knowledge of the drugs themselves but deep understanding of physiology, careful monitoring, and dedicated attention throughout surgical procedures. By the early decades of the 20th century, a quiet transformation was taking place in hospitals across Europe and America. The administration of anesthesia, once treated as a simple task that could be handed to the most junior person in the operating room, was beginning to reveal its true complexity. What had seemed straightforward in those early, optimistic days after Morton's demonstration had evolved into something far more nuanced, demanding skills and knowledge that required years to master. In many hospitals during the late 1800s, the job of holding the ether cone or chloroform mask had fallen to medical students, nurses, or even orderlies with minimal training. The surgeon, naturally enough, focused on the operation itself, trusting that someone else could simply drip the anesthetic agent onto a cloth and keep the patient unconscious. It was considered a necessary but unremarkable part of surgery, requiring attention but not necessarily expertise. Yet as surgical procedures grew more ambitious and prolonged, this casual approach began to show its limitations. Patients sometimes experienced complications that had nothing to do with the surgery itself. Some struggled with breathing difficulties during longer operations. Others took worrying amounts of time to awaken, or showed concerning changes in their pulse and color that the surgical team, focused on their intricate work, might not immediately notice. The person managing the anesthetic needed to watch the patient continuously, making subtle adjustments based on dozens of subtle signs, all while staying out of the surgeon's way. A few physicians began to recognize that keeping someone safely suspended in that delicate state between consciousness and required its own particular expertise. These early specialists often came to the work almost by accident, finding themselves drawn to the challenges that others overlooked. They discovered that successful anesthesia depended on understanding not just the drugs themselves, but the individual patient's condition, the nature of the planned surgery, and how different medications might interact with existing health problems. In Britain, a surgeon's wife named Isabella Herr became one of the earliest examples of someone dedicating themselves primarily to anesthesia. Though not formally trained as a physician herself, she worked alongside her husband in the operating theatre and developed remarkable skill at administering chloroform safely. Her careful attention to patients' breathing and color, her steady hands and calm presence, made her assistance invaluable. While her contributions remained mostly unrecognized by official medical channels due to the social constraints of her time, she represented the beginning of a shift in thinking about what anesthesia required. Across the Atlantic, physicians like Isabella Koller, Herb's contemporary, John Snow, had already been making detailed observations about anesthesia administration in London since the late 1840s. Snow designed specialized inhalers that allowed more precise control over the concentration of anesthetic vapors. He kept meticulous records of thousands of cases, noting which techniques worked best for different types of patients and procedures. His systematic approach demonstrated that anesthesia could be studied, refined, and improved through careful observation and documentation. As the 19th century drew to a close, a handful of physicians in different countries began to focus their practices primarily on anesthesia. They published papers describing their techniques, shared observations about difficult cases, and started to build a body of specialized knowledge. In Germany, physicians developed new approaches to regional anesthesia following Koller's cocaine discoveries. In France, researchers explored different combinations of medications that might work better together than any single agent alone. The First World War, for all its tragedy, brought unexpected advances in anesthesia practice. The enormous number of injured soldiers requiring surgery created urgent demand for skilled anesthetists. Military hospitals became training grounds where physicians learned to manage anesthesia for massive numbers of patients under challenging conditions. Doctors who might never have specialized in anesthesia in peacetime found themselves developing expertise born of necessity, learning to work efficiently while maintaining safety even in field hospitals far from ideal conditions. Following the war, these experienced practitioners returned to civilian medicine with new skills and a conviction that anesthesia deserved recognition as a legitimate specialty. In 1919, the first university professorship in anesthesia was established at the University of Wisconsin, recognizing that this field merited the same academic attention as surgery or internal medicine. Other institutions slowly followed, creating formal training programs rather than relying on informal apprenticeship. The establishment of professional societies marked another crucial step toward recognition. The American Society of Anesthesiologists, initially formed as a much smaller group in 1905, gradually expanded as more physicians identified primarily as anesthetists. In Britain, the Association of Anesthetists was founded in 1932, creating a forum where practitioners could share knowledge, establish standards, and advocate for their field's importance. These organizations began publishing specialized journals dedicated entirely to anesthesia research and practice. Training programs emerged that required years of dedicated study after medical school. Aspiring anesthetists learned pharmacology in depth, studying not just how anesthetic drugs worked but how they interacted with the body's systems. They studied respiratory physiology, understanding the mechanics of breathing and how to support patients whose natural reflexes were suppressed. They learned to manage equipment that grew increasingly sophisticated, from simple masks to complex machines that could precisely control gas mixtures and monitor patients' vital signs. The specialty also developed its own leaders and teachers, physicians who became known for their particular expertise and their ability to pass knowledge to the next generation. These senior anesthetists created the first textbooks dedicated entirely to their field, moving beyond scattered articles to comprehensive guides that could train practitioners systematically. They established residency programs where younger doctors could spend several years focusing exclusively on anesthesia before entering independent practice. Recognition came gradually rather than suddenly. Hospitals began creating positions specifically for anesthesiologists rather than assigning the task to whoever happened to be available. Surgical teams started to see the anesthetist as an equal partner whose expertise enabled the surgeon's work rather than simply as an assistant. The understanding grew that the anesthetist's responsibility extended beyond keeping the patient unconscious to actively protecting and supporting the patient's well-being throughout the entire surgical experience. By mid-century, anesthesiology had achieved recognition as a full medical specialty in most developed countries, with board certifications, fellowship programs, and research departments. What had begun as an afterthought had become a cornerstone of modern medicine, a field requiring as much dedication and skill as any other medical discipline. The journey from ether frolics to board-certified specialists had taken a full century, but it reflected medicine's growing understanding that conquering pain required not just discovering effective drugs but mastering the art and science of using them safely. As the specialty of anesthesiology matured through the middle decades of the 20th century, researchers and practitioners turned their attention to creating more refined tools and techniques. The gas machines and ether drips that had served for generations were giving way to new approaches that offered greater precision and control. The introduction of intravenous anesthetics marked a significant departure from the inhalation methods that had dominated since Morton's demonstration. In the 1930s, thiopental sodium arrived as one of the first practical intravenous agents, allowing anesthesia to begin smoothly and rapidly. Instead of the gradual process of breathing in vapors until consciousness faded, patients could now drift into sleep within seconds of an injection. The agent became widely used for initiating anesthesia, creating a gentler experience for patients who no longer needed to breathe through masks as they lost consciousness. The decades following the Second World War brought an expanding array of pharmaceutical options. Chemists synthesized new compounds designed for specific purposes within the anesthetic process. Some drugs induced sleep without providing pain relief. Others blocked pain signals without causing unconsciousness. Still others relaxed muscles to facilitate surgical access. Anesthesiologists learned to combine these agents, crafting individualized approaches for each patient and procedure. The art of anesthesia became increasingly sophisticated as practitioners learned to conduct what some described as a carefully orchestrated symphony of medications. Monitoring technology evolved alongside these pharmaceutical advances. Early anesthesiologists had relied primarily on their senses, watching breathing patterns, feeling pulses, noting changes in skin color. The stethoscope allowed them to listen to heart and lung sounds throughout procedures. But as operations grew longer and more complex, the medical community recognized the need for more continuous and precise information about patients' conditions. The pulse oximeter, developed and refined through several decades before becoming standard equipment in the 1980s, represented a breakthrough in safety. This device used light wavelengths to measure oxygen saturation in the blood continuously and non-invasively. A small sensor clipped to a finger provided constant feedback about how well oxygen was reaching the patient's tissues. What previous generations could only estimate by observing skin tone could now be measured with precision, second by second throughout a procedure. Capnography, which measured carbon dioxide in exhaled breath, offered another window into patient status. By tracking breathing patterns and the exchange of gases in the lungs, anesthesiologists gained early warning of potential complications. These monitors, along with continuous blood pressure measurement and electrocardiography, transformed the anesthesiologist's workspace into what resembled an aircraft cockpit, filled with displays providing streams of physiological data. Computer technology began influencing anesthesia practice in the late 20th century. Programmable infusion pumps could deliver intravenous medications at precisely calculated rates, adjusting flows to maintain stable drug levels in the bloodstream. Some systems incorporated algorithms that adjusted delivery based on patient characteristics and real-time monitoring data. Research groups explored target-controlled infusion systems that used pharmacological models to predict drug concentrations in the brain and automatically adjust administration. The range of anesthetic techniques expanded to match the diversity of modern surgical procedures. Regional anesthesia methods became increasingly sophisticated, allowing surgeons to operate on specific body areas while patients remained conscious or lightly sedated. Ultrasound guidance transformed nerve block procedures, letting practitioners visualize anatomy and watch as local anesthetic spread around target nerves. What had once required anatomical landmarks and practiced hands could now be performed with visual confirmation, improving success rates and reducing complications. Pediatric anesthesia emerged as a subspecialty with its own techniques and considerations. Children metabolized drugs differently than adults, required different equipment sizes, and responded to the medical environment in unique ways. Specialists developed approaches specifically designed for young patients, from premature infants undergoing delicate procedures to adolescents having routine operations. Child life specialists and specially trained nurses worked alongside anesthesiologists to create less frightening experiences, using distraction techniques and age-appropriate explanations. Cardiac anesthesia evolved to support increasingly complex heart surgeries. As cardiac surgeons developed procedures to repair intricate defects and replace failing hearts, anesthesiologists created methods to maintain patients during these lengthy operations. They worked closely with perfusionists operating heart-lung bypass machines, managed profound cooling and rewarming of patients' bodies, and navigated the unique challenges posed when the heart itself was the surgical target. Obstetric anesthesia continued advancing beyond the chloroform that had earned Queen Victoria's endorsement. Epidural analgesia for labor became widely available, offering pain relief while allowing mothers to remain alert and participate in childbirth. Techniques improved to provide effective pain control with minimal effects on the baby or the progress of labor. The specialty embraced the philosophy that pain relief during childbirth was not merely acceptable but could contribute to healthier outcomes for both mothers and infants. Research into anesthesia's mechanisms continued seeking answers to fundamental questions. How exactly did these diverse chemicals produce unconsciousness? Scientists explored anesthetic effects on neurotransmitter systems, cell membrane properties, and neural network function. While questions remained, understanding deepened. Researchers discovered that different anesthetic agents worked through various mechanisms, affecting different receptor systems and brain regions. This knowledge informed the development of newer drugs and helped explain why patients responded differently to various agents. The question of awareness during anesthesia received systematic attention. Though rare, cases where patients retained some consciousness or formed memories during procedures prompted investigation into monitoring consciousness depth. Researchers developed electroencephalogram-based monitors that analyzed brain wave patterns to estimate anesthetic depth. These devices provided additional information beyond traditional vital signs, though their proper role in routine practice remained a subject of ongoing discussion and study. Safety initiatives transformed anesthesia into one of medicine's most reliable endeavors. Professional societies established standards for monitoring, equipment, and training. Simulation centers allowed practitioners to rehearse responses to rare emergencies in realistic settings. Incident reporting systems captured information about complications, enabling analysis of contributing factors and development of preventive strategies. The specialty embraced principles from aviation and other high-reliability industries, applying concepts like checklists and structured communication to medical practice. As the 21st century progressed, anesthesia continued enabling medical achievements that would have seemed miraculous to earlier generations. Multi-organ transplants, separation of conjoined twins, marathon procedures lasting entire days, all required sophisticated anesthetic management. Yet perhaps equally remarkable was the safety with which millions of routine procedures occurred annually. The elderly patient having cataract surgery, the teenager getting wisdom teeth removed, the parent undergoing knee repair, all benefited from more than a century and a half of accumulated knowledge and refinement. The story of anesthesia reflects humanity's persistent effort to reduce suffering and expand healing possibilities. From Humphry Davy's curious experiments with nitrous oxide to the computer-controlled delivery systems of modern operating rooms, the journey encompasses contributions from countless individuals. Some, like Morton and Simpson, achieved historical recognition. Others worked in obscurity, publishing small observations in medical journals or teaching techniques to the next generation of practitioners. Together, they transformed surgery from an ordeal endured only in desperation to a routine part of modern healthcare, generally experienced without pain or memory. As we bring to a close our journey through the remarkable story of anesthesia, from the early experiments with laughing gas to the breakthrough that transformed surgery into an act of healing, we hope these tales of human ingenuity have gently carried you through the evening. Thank you for joining us on this peaceful exploration of how courage and curiosity conquered pain. If these calm adventures have brought you comfort, we'd love to have you with us again. Please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. And now, as the night deepens and your mind settles, we wish you the sweetest of dreams. Good night, fellow dreamer, and may your sleep be restful and your dreams be kind.